The last thing Aleksei remembered was the roar of automatic gunfire and a scream behind him. He was covering the group's retreat on the outskirts of the ruined city. 3 bullets hit his bulletproof vest, and one went lower. He fell onto the concrete and felt his body stop responding. Then there was darkness. Not sleep, not unconsciousness, just nothing. As if the world had been turned off. And then the world turned back on, but it was a different world. Aleksei opened his eyes and saw the sky. Not the gray sky above the ruined city, but a clear blue sky with clouds moving too slowly. He was lying in a ditch. The dirty water came up to his waist. It stank of rot and something sour. He tried to get up and couldn't. His body wouldn't obey him. Not like after an injury. It was different. His body was enormous, heavy. Every movement was so difficult, as if sandbags had been piled on top of him. Aleksei looked at his hands. These weren't his hands. Thick, stubby fingers. Skin caked in mud and scrapes. He tried to clench his fist, and his fingers barely bent. Panic rose in his throat, but he suppressed it. 12 years in the Special Forces had taught him one thing. Panic kills faster than a bullet. He lay in the ditch and breathed. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Every breath was a struggle, as if his lungs were in a vice. He began to gather information. A foreign body, an unfamiliar place. He was alive, though he should be dead. So either this was a coma and hallucinations, or something had happened that he didn't yet understand. In any case, the first step was the same. Get up. Aleksei rolled onto his side. It took about a minute. Then he braced his hands against the edge of the ditch. His hands were shaking. He pushed himself up, and his body shifted a couple of centimeters. Again. Another couple of centimeters. He'd been struggling out of the ditch for nearly 10 minutes. When he finally stumbled onto dry ground, he just lay there, gasping for air. 2 people walked by, a man and a woman in strange clothes, something like rough tunics and leather vests. The man looked at him and said something to the woman. She hesitated. Aleksei didn't understand the words, but caught the tone. Contempt. He'd seen this before. In every city in the world, there are people whom others consider trash. Apparently, the body he'd woken up in belonged to one of them. Aleksei sat up. His head was spinning. He looked himself over. The body was stocky but not muscular, more like bloated, as if filled with something heavy from the inside. The clothes were rags. His feet were bare and covered in mud. Something dark was visible on his left wrist. He brought his hand up to his eyes. A mark. A black pattern like a chain wrapping around his wrist. 5 links, each link the size of a coin. He touched the mark. The skin was smooth. The mark wasn't a tattoo. It was part of the skin. And the moment his finger touched the last link, a light flashed before his eyes. Not physical light, something inside his head. As if someone had turned on a screen right inside his mind. Aleksei blinked. A map hung before him. A map of an entire continent. He saw it not with his eyes, but with some kind of inner vision. The continent was called Aldoria. He knew this as surely as he knew his own name. The information was simply there. 5 points glowed on the map. Red, pulsating marks scattered along the edges of the continent. 1 in the south, 1 on the west coast, 1 in the north in the mountains, 1 in the east beyond the desert, and 1 in the center but deep underground. Words appeared beneath the map. Bearer of the usurper's seal. Objective: free the 5 priestesses. Links of the curse removed. 0 out of 5. Aleksei read it twice, then 3 times. Then he closed his eyes and opened them again. The map hadn't gone anywhere. He was sitting in the mud on the side of the road, in a foreign world, in a foreign body that weighed as much as 2 people and could barely move. And some system was telling him that he had to free 5 hostages scattered across the edges of the continent. Aleksei allowed himself a single second of despair. Exactly one. Then the despair faded, and the operator kicked in. He began to analyze. The body wasn't just heavy, it was bound. He could feel it now that he knew where to look. It wasn't fat or illness. Something was pressing from within, as if every muscle were wrapped in an invisible chain. 5 links on the wrist, 5 priestesses on the map. The connection was obvious. Each priestess was a single link. Saving a priestess meant removing a link. Removing a link meant freeing the body. The logic is simple and cruel. Whoever set this up has chained the carrier to his own flesh so he'll never reach the priestesses. A perfect trap. There are hostages. There is a rescuer. But the rescuer cannot move. Aleksei smiled. For 12 years he'd been pulling people out of places from which there is no return. From bunkers, from mountain caves, from buildings packed with militants. And every time before an operation, it was the same feeling. The task is impossible. Resources are scarce. There is no time, and yet he must go. He looked at the map in his head. The nearest marker was glowing in the south. Judging by the scale, it was a 10-day journey to it. For a normal person, for him, in this body, 3 weeks, maybe a month. Aleksei slowly got to his feet. His knees were shaking. His back ached. Every step sent a jolt of pain through his joints. He took 1 step, then a second, then a third. On the 4th, he stopped to catch his breath. A cart drove past. The driver didn't even glance his way. Aleksei moved on. A step, another step. He was walking along the road toward the nearest settlement. The system indicated that a town lay half an hour's walk away for an average person. For him, it would take half a day. He needed food, water, and information, the 3 basic requirements of any operation. He walked and thought. 5 hostages, the worst starting point of his career. No weapons, no team, no communication, just his head and his experience. Aleksei remembered his first day at training. The instructor had said one thing back then. An operator isn't the one who shoots the best. An operator is the one who thinks when everyone else is shooting. Right now, he couldn't shoot. He couldn't run. He couldn't even walk properly. But he could think. Aleksei walked. Every step was a struggle through the pain, but he walked. Because somewhere to the south of this alien world, in a dark cell, sat the first hostage, and he was going to get her out. By evening, he reached the city gates. The city was called Korten, low walls of gray stone, 2 guards at the gates. Aleksei approached. The guards looked at him. One grimaced and told the other that the hunchback had shown up again. Aleksei understood the words. The language of this world was somehow comprehensible to him. Another ability of the body, or perhaps the seals. The guard stepped forward and shoved him in the chest with his hand. Aleksei took 2 steps back from the light shove. His body was so weak that even a gentle push knocked him off balance. The guard told him to get lost and stop scaring the merchants with his appearance. Aleksei looked at the guard. He noticed that the sword on the guard's belt hung too low. The scabbard's strap was worn and frayed. The guard's left hand was weaker than his right. He noticed all this in 2 seconds. Habit. But right now, this information was useless. He wouldn't be able to handle even a child in this body. Aleksei gave the guards a wide berth and entered through a side passage by the wall where stones had crumbled away, forming a gap. In the city, he found the market by its smell. Merchants were selling food, meat, bread, and some root vegetables. Aleksei didn't have a single coin. He walked around the market twice. On his 3rd lap, he noticed that a sack of grain had torn at one stall, and the grains were spilling into the dust. The merchant was cursing and gathering what he could. Aleksei approached and began to help. He gathered the grains from the ground with slow, awkward movements. At first, the merchant wanted to shoo him away, but then he saw that the vagrant was actually helping and let him stay. When the sack was sewn up, the merchant tossed him a piece of stale bread. Aleksei ate the bread in a minute, his first meal in this world. hard and tasteless. But calories are calories. He sat down by the wall and began to listen. People at the market were talking about prices, about the monsters, which were becoming more numerous, about how this year's harvest was worse than last year's, about how the roads to the south were dangerous. Aleksei absorbed the information. The world was dying. It was clear from the snippets of conversation. The land was yielding less and less. Monsters were multiplying. Cities were shrinking. And no one knew why. But Aleksei knew. The 5 priestesses who sustained this world had been locked in dungeons for 1,000 years. And as long as they remained locked away, the world would wither away. He sat by the wall and watched the sunset. The orange sun sank below the city walls. A map with 5 markers burned in his mind. The nearest one was to the south. A 20-day journey for his body, maybe more. Aleksei closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he would start gathering information about the southern road, about the dungeon, about what awaited him. But for now, he needed to sleep. He lay down right against the wall on the bare ground. His body ached. His joints hurt. It was hard to breathe. But he fell asleep quickly. An operator knows how to sleep anywhere, anytime, because you never know when you'll get to sleep next. Bogdan spent 3 days in Korten. He didn't waste any time. Every morning, he walked around the market and did odd jobs for food. He carried boxes. He swept. He picked up trash. The work was agonizing. A box that any porter could lift with one hand, Bo barely dragged along the ground with both hands. The merchants laughed. Children threw apple cores and clumps of dirt at him. One boy called him a walking mountain. Another asked if he'd swallowed a whole horse. Bogdan didn't react. He listened. Every conversation at the market, every rumor in the tavern he peered into through the window, every word from the guards on the walls. On the second day, he learned that south of the Greenvale Forest, there was a place the locals called the Black Mound, an old fortress built into the hill. No one has gone there in 200 years. Heroes and adventurers used to go there. Not a single one returned. The locals said the mound was teeming with creatures, some kind of underground monsters, stone hounds, and something big at the very bottom, something that never sleeps. Bowden compared the information with the map in his head. The priestess's mark was glowing right there, Black Kurgan. On the 3rd day, he found an old man at the edge of the market. The old man was selling worn-out maps of the area. Bowden helped him unload his wares from the cart, and in return, the old man let him look at one of the maps. Bowden memorized the route. The road south went through the forest. The forest was dangerous. Monsters, bandits. But there was a bypass trail along the western bank of the Tarn River. 2 days longer, but safer. Bowden chose the trail. He couldn't afford a fight. In this body, any fight meant death. On the 4th day, he left Korten. Early in the morning, while the guards were still yawning, through the same crack in the wall he had entered through. He took with him everything he could gather. Half a loaf of bread, a flask of water, a piece of rope, an old knife he'd found in the trash behind the tavern. The knife was dull and rusty, but it was his only weapon. Bowden stepped out onto the road and turned south. He walked slowly. His body wouldn't let him do otherwise. Every step required effort. After an hour of walking, he was already gasping for breath. After 2 hours, his legs gave out. He sat down on the side of the road. He rested. He drank water in small sips. And he kept going. On the 1st day, he covered about 8 kilometers. For a special forces operator, that's the distance of a morning jog. For Bowden, it was a feat. During a rest stop, he sat and looked at his hands. The curse weighed on every muscle. He could feel it now. Not just heaviness, but something alive inside his body, as if hundreds of invisible threads were pulling at his muscles and bones. 5 links on his wrist glowed dimly in the twilight. 5 chains inside his body. He imagined the first one snapping, how his body would breathe freely for the first time in this life. That thought pushed him forward. On the second day of his journey, he turned toward the Tarn River. The path was narrow, overgrown. It was clear that no one had walked it in a long time. Bowden walked and analyzed the terrain, a cameraman's habit. He marked spots where he could take cover, where the view was good, where there were natural traps, ravines, cliffs, narrow passages between the rocks. He stored it all in his memory. On the third day, he encountered his first monster. The creature leaped out of the bushes on the riverbank, the size of a large dog, black fur, yellow eyes, something halfway between a wolf and a lizard. Bowden froze. The creature growled and charged at him. He couldn't run, he couldn't fight, but he could think. Bowden slowly backed away toward the cliff edge. The creature followed him. He stood right at the edge, the river below him, deep and fast. The creature leaped. Bowden fell to the ground. He didn't jump back. He simply collapsed as if mowed down. His prison-like body didn't know how to jump, but it knew how to fall. The creature flew over him and plunged into the river with a screech. The current caught it and carried it away. Bowden lay on the edge of the cliff and breathed. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. But he was alive. His first battle in the new world. A victory by a single trick. He got up and kept going. On the fifth day, the bread ran out. On the sixth, the water ran out. Bowden found a stream and drank his fill. Then he found some berry bushes. The berries were sour and tough, but edible. He gathered as many as he could and kept going. His body ached. Every day the pain became more familiar. Not easier, just more familiar. The operator had grown accustomed to the pain. Pain is just information. It tells you that the body is working at its limit. But the limit can be pushed. On the 10th day, Bogdan saw the first signs. The earth grew darker, the grass withered, the trees grew crooked and sparse, the air grew heavier. Something was poisoning this land, something from the Black Mound. On the 12th day, he saw it, a hill on the horizon, black. Not from stone, from something else, as if the earth itself had darkened around it. Bogdan stopped and sat down. He pulled everything he knew from his memory. The Black Mound, an old fortress built into the hill, underground levels, stone hounds, something big in the center. And somewhere down there, the High Priestess, Terra, priestess of the earth. Bogdan closed his eyes and switched to planning mode. A direct assault was impossible. He could barely walk. Any monster would kill him with a single blow. So he had to bypass the monsters, or outsmart them, or lure them into a trap. He needed reconnaissance. How many creatures? Where the patrols were? Were there any weak spots in the defenses? Was there a back entrance? Bowden stood up and began circling the mound in a wide arc. He moved slowly. He stopped every 100 meters. He observed. He memorized. It took him the whole day to circle the hill. By evening, he had the full picture. The main entrance was from the north, a wide opening in the rock. 5 or 6 stone hounds constantly roamed in front of it, gray creatures resembling wolves carved from stone, fast and heavy. From the west, the slope was steep, impassable. From the east, thickets of dead trees, fewer creatures, but they're there. And from the south, Bowden found the key feature from the south, a crack in the rock, narrow. An adult of average build would barely squeeze through. Bowden couldn't fit through in his current form, but the crack led somewhere deeper inside. He could feel a draft. So there's space inside. That means it's a potential entrance. The problem is that he's too wide for this crack. Bowden sat down by the crack and thought. The curse wouldn't let his body shrink. But the crack could be widened. The rock around it is weathered and crumbly. If he could find a tool, if he worked quietly, if he didn't attract the creature's attention. Bowden looked at his rusty knife. Then he looked at the rock. Then back at the knife. It would take days, maybe a week, scraping the rock with a dull knife in a body that grew tired after 10 strokes. But he had no other plan. Bowden began to work. He scraped the rock with the knife. slowly, methodically, bit by bit, crumb by crumb. He worked for an hour, rested for 2, worked again. At night, he slept right by the crack, wrapped in rags. In the morning, he continued. The stone gave way, slowly, but it gave way. On the 3rd day of work, a large chunk broke off the edge of the crack. Bodan froze. He listened. It was quiet. The creatures hadn't heard him. He continued. By the 5th day, the crack was a hand's width wider. By the 7th, 2 hands' widths. Bodan tried to squeeze through. He got stuck halfway through. 2 more days of work. And finally, on the 9th day, he squeezed through. His skin was scraped raw, his shirt was torn, but he was inside. The tunnel was narrow and dark. Bodan crawled forward, literally crawled, on his stomach. His body barely fit, but he was moving. Every meter closer to the priestess, every meter closer to the first link. The tunnel stretched deep into the hill. Bodan crawled in complete darkness. His hands felt their way along the wet stone. The air was cold and damp. Somewhere ahead, water was dripping. He counted the meters, a habit from his past life, always knowing how far he'd gone and how far remained. After 30 meters, the tunnel widened. Bodan was able to get down on all fours. After 50 meters, he stood up to his full height. The darkness was absolute. He walked along the wall, touching it with his hand. Right, always right. An old rule. In a maze, stick to one wall, and sooner or later, you'll find the exit. Or the center. He needed the center. He heard the first sound 10 minutes later, a tapping on stone, fast and rhythmic. A stone hound. Somewhere ahead and to the right. Bodan froze. He pressed himself against the wall. He held his breath. The tapping grew closer. Then it receded. The creature had passed by. Bodan waited another minute and moved on. The tunnel branched off. 2 passages. A chill emanated from the left. Warmth from the right. Bodan chose the right one. Warmth down below meant something alive. Or something magical. In any case, it was closer to his goal. He walked for 20 minutes. He froze twice when he heard sounds. Hounds were patrolling the tunnels. 3 or 4 of them. Bodan memorized the rhythm. About every 7 minutes, one of them passed by. He had a window between patrols. He moved during those windows. 7 minutes of movement. He froze. He waited. Another 7 minutes. The tunnel led him into a large cave. Bodan sensed the space by the echo of his footsteps. And he saw light. A dim green light emanated from the walls. Moss, or something like moss, glowing. Now he could see. The cave was the size of a church hall. The ceiling was high. The walls were covered with this glowing moss. And in the center of the cave stood he, the guardian. Bodan saw him and stopped behind a rock ledge. A golem. Huge, 3 meters tall, made of the same black stone as the hill. Arms like logs, a small, eyeless head. A symbol was carved on its chest, something like a lock. The golem didn't move. It stood in the center of the cave like a statue. But Bodan had no doubt that it was alive. Behind the golem was a door. A stone slab with the same lock symbol. Behind that door was a priestess. Bodan could sense it. The mark on his wrist pulsed warmly. He crouched behind a ledge and began to think. The golem stood between him and the door. The golem was huge and made of stone. Even with a weapon, Bodan wouldn't be able to handle it in this body. In any body. This wasn't the kind of enemy you defeated head-on. So he needed a workaround. Or a distraction. Or a key. Bodan looked again at the castle's symbol, on the golem's chest and on the door. The same symbol. Maybe the golem was the key. Maybe he didn't need to be killed, but activated. Or deactivated. Bodan began to survey the cave, slowly, from behind cover. Along the walls lay the remains of something. broken weapons, bones, swords rusted black, shields split in two. Those very heroes who came here and never returned. Dozens, maybe hundreds over 200 years. They all tried to kill the golem. They all failed. Bodan noted this. A head-on attack doesn't work. 200 years of proof. He continued his search. In the far corner of the cave, he found a niche. A stone lay in the niche, small, about the size of a palm. The same symbol as on the lock was on the stone, but this symbol glowed, dimly, barely noticeably. But it glowed. Bodan approached the niche. The golem didn't react. It stood motionless. Bodan picked up the stone, heavy for its size, warm. The symbol on it pulsed in sync with the symbol on the door. An artifact key. Bodan understood. The stone opens the door, but the golem stands between the stone and the door. The question was whether the golem reacted to movement, to sound, to presence, or to the stone. Bodan found a shard of a sword on the floor. He threw it across the cave. The metal clanged against the stone. The golem didn't move, not at the sound. Bodan picked up a small pebble and threw it at the golem. The pebble bounced off a stone leg. The golem didn't move, not at the touch. Bodan took a step out from behind cover, then a second, then a third. He walked slowly toward the door. The golem stood motionless. Bodan walked halfway across the cave. The golem didn't move. He came within 10 steps, 5. And then the symbol on the golem's chest flashed. The golem came to life. Its head turned toward Bodan. Its arms rose. Bodan froze. The golem was looking at him, at his hand, at the keystone in his hand. The golem reacts to the key. Bodan stepped back. The golem didn't follow him, but it didn't return to sleep mode either. Its eyes, if you could call them that, followed the stone. Bodan went back behind the ledge. He put the stone on the ground. He waited. A minute. 3. 5. The golem slowly lowered its arms. The symbol on its chest dimmed. It fell asleep again. Bodan sat and thought. The golem guards the door from whoever carries the key. Logical. The usurper didn't want anyone to reach the priestess, even with the key. But the golem reacts not to a person, but to the key. So if the key is at the door, and Bodan is far away, no, that won't work. He needs to insert the key into the door. But with the key in his hands, the golem will kill him in a second. Bodan surveyed the cave again, the ceiling, the walls, the floor, and he saw what he was looking for. Cracks in the ceiling. Deep. Old. The stone above was hanging by a thread. Tons of rock hung over the golem's head, just waiting for a good jolt. Bodan looked at the cracks, then at the keystone, then at the golem, and he made a plan. He returned to the tunnel, found several large pieces of rock, hauled them into the cave behind the ledge. Each piece was worth a fortune to him. It took him 2 hours. Then he found bones and broken spear shafts on the cave floor. He tied them together with a rope. It made for a crude lever, not elegant, but it worked. Bodan placed the stone fragments at the base of the wall beneath the cracks in the ceiling. He braced the lever against the largest fragment. Pushing the lever meant jamming the fragment into the wall. The wall would crack further. The ceiling would collapse. On the golem. If the golem was standing in the right spot. Bodan took the keystone. He stepped out from behind the ledge. The golem came to life. Bodan didn't head for the door. He walked toward the wall, under the cracks. The golem took a step toward him. The golem's first step shook the cave. The second step brought it closer. Bodan stood by the wall. The golem was walking toward him. 3 meters. 2. Bodan threw the keystone across the cave toward the door. The golem turned around. The keystone was now by the door. The golem walked toward it and stood directly beneath the cracks. Bodin threw his weight onto the lever, with all his damned heavy body. For the first time in his life, his weight was an advantage. The fragment slammed into the wall. The wall cracked. The ceiling rumbled. Tons of stone crashed down on the golem. Dust swirled up to the ceiling. The roar was deafening. Bogdan fell to the floor and covered his head with his hands. When the dust settled, he raised his head. The golem lay beneath a pile of stones. One arm was still twitching. Then it stopped. The symbol on its chest went dark. Bogdan lay on the floor, breathing heavily. Then he stood up. He stepped over the debris. He picked up the stone key by the door. His hands were shaking. He held the stone up to the symbol on the door. The symbols matched. The stone flashed. The door shook and slowly slid open. There was light behind the door, warm, golden light. Bogdan stepped inside. The room was small, round. The walls were made of smooth stone covered in runes, and in the center stood a pillar of light. And within the pillar of light stood a woman, tall, dark hair down to her shoulders. Her skin was like earth after rain. Her eyes were closed. Her hands were pressed to her chest. She wasn't breathing, or she was breathing so slowly it was imperceptible. Bogdan approached the pillar. The mark on his wrist was burning. The first link pulsed like mad. He reached out and touched the pillar of light. The light burned his palm. Pain shot through his arm to his shoulder. But Bogdan didn't pull his hand away. A hostage negotiator doesn't pull his hand away when he's rescuing a hostage. He clenched his teeth and pressed down. The pillar of light cracked like glass. Shards of light scattered across the room. The woman swayed. She opened her eyes, green as young grass. She looked at Bogdan, at the dirty, heavy vagrant before her, and she said one word, a name. Tara. She said her name. Tara stood and looked at him. She had stood in that pillar of light for 1,000 years, 1,000 years of solitude, and the first thing she saw was a dirty vagrant with scraped hands and torn clothes. She swayed. Her legs wouldn't hold her. Bogdan stepped forward and offered his shoulder. Tara leaned her weight against him. It was heavy, even for Bogdan's stiffened body, but he held her up. She asked who he was. Bogdan replied that he was the bearer of the seal. He showed her the mark on his wrist with 5 links. Tara looked at the mark. Her eyes widened. She said she didn't believe anyone would come, that heroes had come and perished. She'd heard their screams through the stone, heard the golem breaking them, year after year, century after century. And then the heroes stopped coming. Bogdan said he wasn't a hero. He was an operator, and he had a job to get her and 4 others out. Tara looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. At that moment, the link on Bogdan's wrist flashed. Pain shot through his entire body. Not like a blow, like a release, as if someone had cut the rope that was tightening around his chest. The first link snapped. Bogdan felt it physically. The pressure eased. Not completely. 4 links were still pressing down, but one was gone, and the difference was enormous. He breathed in, deeply. For the first time in this body, the air reached the very bottom of his lungs. An interface flashed before his eyes. Link removed, 1 out of 5. Skill acquired, hand of the earth. Bogdan looked at his hands. He clenched his fist. The fist closed. Completely. His fingers obeyed. His muscles responded. Not perfectly, not like before, but 10 times better than an hour ago. He stood straighter. His back straightened. His joints stopped aching. His body was still heavy and cumbersome, but now it moved. Not like a prison, but like a body. Slow and clumsy, but alive. Bogdan took a step, a firm step, without pain. Then a second, a third. He walked across the room, turned around, walked back. For the first time in this life, walking wasn't torture. Tara watched him. She said the seal had begun to release him, that with every freed priestess he would come closer to his true form. Bowden nodded. One hostage was free, 4 targets remained, and he could finally clench his fist. Now they had to get out. The golem was destroyed, but the stonehounds were still patrolling the tunnels. Bowden and Tara headed back. Tara walked slowly, 1,000 years without movement. Her body wouldn't obey her. Bowden supported her. Now he could. His hands no longer trembled from the mere effort. They walked through the tunnels. Bowden led the way. He remembered the route, every turn, every fork, an operator's memory. When they heard the hounds panting, Bowden stopped Tara with a gesture. They pressed themselves against the wall. The hound passed by. It didn't notice, or chose not to react. Maybe without the golem, they'd lost their target. Maybe the priestess's seal was scaring them off. Bowden didn't check. They moved from cover to cover, slowly, quietly, like an operator guiding a rescued hostage through enemy territory. Don't run, don't make a sound, every step deliberate. 2 hours later, they reached the crevice. Bowden squeezed through first. It was easier now. His body obeyed him better. Tara helped. She was slender and passed through without trouble. It was evening outside. The sunset painted the sky orange. Tara stepped out into the open and stopped. She stood and looked at the sky. She hadn't seen the sky in 1,000 years. Bowden stood beside her and said nothing. He knew this moment belonged to her, not to him. Tara stood there for a long time. Then she turned to him. Her eyes were shining. She said she was grateful. Not for saving her, for coming. For the fact that someone had come. Bowden nodded. They left the kurgan. They walked north for 2 days. Bowden tested his new body. With every passing hour, he felt the difference. He could walk faster. He could carry weight. He could move for hours without stopping. Not like the Special Forces soldier from his past life, but like a normal person. After the prison he'd been in, it felt like a superpower. During a rest stop, he tried out a skill. Palm of the earth. He placed his hand on the ground and concentrated. The earth trembled. Beneath his palm, a stone pushed up from the soil. Small, about the size of a fist. Bowden tensed harder. The rock grew, to the size of a head, to the size of a torso. Bogdan removed his hand. The rock remained. He could move the earth, lift rocks from under his feet, create obstacles, walls, traps. For an operator accustomed to using the terrain, it was the perfect weapon. Not a sword, not a magical strike, a tactical tool. Tara explained that the skill would grow, that for now it was weak because the link had only just been established. In time, he would be able to move mountains, but for now, a fist of stone. Bogdan said that was enough. On the 3rd day after Kurgan, they reached Korten, the city where Bogdan had been a heap in a ditch. They approached the gates. The guards watched them. Bogdan had changed. Not outwardly. He was still large and heavy, but he moved differently. He stood straight. He walked with confidence. And walking beside him was a woman who radiated strength. The guards didn't recognize him. The one who had pushed him away from the gates weeks ago asked who they were and where they were headed. Bowden didn't answer. He simply walked past. The guard didn't stop him. Something in Bowden's gait made him keep quiet. In the city, Bowden found a tavern. He still had no money, but now he could work, for real. He approached the tavern owner and offered to unload a cart of barrels in exchange for food and a room for the night. The owner looked him over and agreed. Bowden unloaded the barrels, heavy oak barrels of ale. Each weighed as much as half of his former prison body. Now he lifted them with difficulty, but he lifted them. The tavern workers watched him, a big man moving barrels that usually take 2 to carry. Not pretty, not easy, but he was moving them. In the evening, the owner gave them food and a room, a small one, with a single bed and a straw mattress on the floor. Bowden gave the bed to Tara. He lay down on the straw himself. Tara was silent all evening. Bowden didn't press her. 1,000 years of loneliness can't be healed in a day. At night, he lay there and looked at the map in his head. 4 markers. The nearest one was on the west coast, the water priestess, Nerida. It was about a 3-week journey to her, through the swamps, through the coastal lands where there are even more monsters than in the south. Bowden began to plan. He needed supplies, food for the road, information about the western dungeon, and he needed to understand what his new skill was capable of in real combat. In the morning, he went out to the tavern's backyard. He placed a stone on the ground and began to train. Hand of earth. Again and again. He lifted the stone, moved it, formed a wall, destroyed the wall. He lifted it again. Tara came out and watched. She said he was using the gift of the earth not like a mage, like a soldier. Bowden replied that he was a soldier, and a soldier trains with a weapon until it becomes an extension of his arm. He trained for 3 days. By the end of the 3rd day, he could raise a stone wall 1.5 feet high in a second. He could thrust a stone spike out of the ground precisely at the desired point. He could bring down a small section of ground, creating a pit trap. Not a great power, but enough in the hands of the operator. On the 4th day, Corton became noisy. Guards were running along the walls. Townspeople were hiding in their homes. Bowden went out onto the wall and saw monsters. A pack of creatures was approaching the city from the south. Not stonehounds, others, larger, black, with horned plates on their backs. About 30 of them, maybe more. The captain of the guard was shouting orders. The guards stood on the walls with crossbows. Their hands were shaking. Corton's wall isn't very high. These creatures will leap over it with ease. Bowden stood on the wall and watched. Assess. 30 creatures, 10 guards. The wall is low. The gate is wooden. They won't hold out. The city will fall in an hour. Bowden climbed down from the wall. He approached the gate from the inside. The captain of the guards saw him and shouted for him to get lost. That he had no time for beggars right now. Bowden didn't answer. He placed his hands on the ground and activated Hand of Earth. The ground in front of the gate bucked. Stone crept up from the soil. A wall. A stone wall. 3 meters high, 5 meters wide, right in front of the city gates. Bowden clenched his teeth. The skill was draining him. Sweat poured down his face. But the wall grew, stone by stone, layer by layer. The creatures reached the wall and crashed into it. The wall held. The stone wall withstood the impact. The creatures began to circle around it. Bowden raised 2 more walls on either side. Lower, 1 meter high, but enough to slow them down. The guards on the walls came to their senses. They began to shoot. Crossbow bolts struck the creatures in the sides. The creatures roared. Some turned back. Some continued to charge. Bowden fell to one knee. The skill was draining him, but he held the walls. Tara stepped out from behind him. She placed her hand on the ground next to his. The earth beneath the wall compacted. It grew harder, thicker. Tara was a priestess of the earth. 1,000 years in captivity had weakened her, but even weakened, she tripled the strength of his wall. The creatures did not get through. 20 minutes later, the last of them fled back south. Bowden sat on the ground. His hands were shaking, but the city stood. The guards on the walls were silent. The captain of the guard looked at Bowden, then at the stone wall in front of the gates, then back at Bowden. He asked who he was. Bowden stood up, looked at the captain, and said that a week ago they'd chased him away from these gates, calling him filth, that he wasn't offended, that they had seen a heap in the ditch. Well, that heap had risen, and behind him was the priestess whom this world had been waiting for 1,000 years. There were 4 more of them, and he had come to rescue them all. In the silence that followed, no one said a word. Bowden turned and walked toward the tavern. Tara walked beside him. Behind them, the stone wall stood like a monument to what had happened. The next morning, they left Corton, westward, toward the coast, toward the second priestess. The road westward led across the plains. The grass here was gray and sparse. The earth was dry. Trees were few and far between and looked sickly. The world was dying. Bowden could see that clearly now. Without the priestesses, the land was losing its power. Harvests were failing. Water was running out. Each year worse than the last, for 1,000 years. They walked with Tara. The priestess had grown stronger during the days spent in Corton. She moved with more confidence. She spoke more. She told of the world as it was before the usurper. Green forests stretching from horizon to horizon, rivers as clear as glass, cities full of life. 5 priestesses stood at the heart of this world and nourished it with their power. Each was responsible for her own element. Terra for earth, Nerida for water, Ignis for fire, Zephyra for wind, Lumen for light. Together they maintained the balance. Then he came. Terra called him the usurper, but Bodin noticed that she pronounced that name strangely, without hatred, with something akin to bitterness. He asked if she had known the usurper before he sealed them away. Terra fell silent for a long time. Then she said she had known him, that he was one of them, the 6th. Not a priest, but a guardian. The one who watched over the balance between the 5 elements. Bodin remembered that. The 6th guardian. Not an outsider, one of their own. That changed the picture. But Terra said nothing more. She said she didn't remember the details. 1,000 years in a pillar of light had erased many memories. Bodin didn't press her. The information would come. It always does if you know how to wait. On the 5th day of their journey, they came to the swamps. The area before the western coast was flooded, not with water, with something dark and viscous. The swamps stretched for dozens of kilometers. The trails were barely visible. The locals bypassed the swamps from the north. That added a week to the journey. Bodin decided to go straight through. He had the earth skill. He could create a solid surface beneath his feet, to lift a stone from the quicksand, to build bridges. They entered the swamps. Bodin led the way. Every few steps he touched the ground and compacted the soil ahead of him. Terra followed in his footsteps. The work was exhausting. The skill drained his strength. But Bodin paced himself. He didn't use it all at once. He worked in short bursts. Compacted a section. Passed through. Compacted the next. Passed through. Rhythm. Discipline. On the 3rd day in the swamps, they met a hunter. A middle-aged man, thin, clothed in the hides of swamp creatures, a spear in his hands, a bundle of small animals on his back. The hunter saw them and stopped. He looked at Bodin with surprise. He said that no one walks straight through the swamps. Bodin replied that they were on their way. The hunter looked at the path of compacted stone behind them. He asked who they were. Bodin said they were travelers, heading for the coast. The hunter introduced himself, Darren. He'd lived in the swamps his whole life. He knew every path, every danger. Bodin asked about the western dungeon. Darren's face darkened. He said there was a place on the coast that fishermen called the Drowning Fortress. Ruins on the rocks by the water, half submerged. The locals don't go near it. Creatures emerge from the ruins at night. Water creatures. They drag fishermen right off their boats. Bodin asked how many there were. Darren said no one had counted them. Those who tried to count never returned. Bodin asked about the most dangerous one. Darren replied that something huge lived inside the fortress. A water serpent. As long as a ship. It appears during high tide. It drags away anything that moves. Bodin remembered. A water serpent. The guardian of the 2nd dungeon. A creature that lives in water. Bodin can't swim in this body. One link has been removed, but he's still heavy. A water fight is certain death for him, so he needs to pull the serpent out of the water, or prevent it from returning to the water, or find a way to reach the priestess without fighting the serpent at all. Darren led them through the worst parts of the swamps. He showed them safe paths. He warned them about poisonous plants and swamp predators. As they parted, he said that if they were heading for the Drowning Fortress, he wished them luck, but he didn't believe they would return. Bodin thanked him. They walked for 4 more days. The swamps ended. Rocky hills began. The wind carried the scent of the sea, salty and heavy. On the seventh day after leaving the swamps, they saw the coast, a gray sea stretching to the horizon. Waves crashed against the black cliffs. And there it stood on the cliffs, the drowning fortress. The ruins were enormous, a former castle or fortress. Half the walls had collapsed into the sea. The lower floors were flooded. The upper floors jutted out from the cliffs like broken teeth. Bowden sat on a hill and watched, all day long, from dawn until sunset. He counted the creatures, water creatures, frog-like but the size of a man, webbed paws, wide mouths full of teeth. They came out of the water and roamed the ruins, patrolling, like the hounds in Black Mound. But there were more of these, far more. Bowden counted about 40, and those were just the ones he could see. There were surely more underwater. At high tide, a serpent rose from the depths. Darren hadn't exaggerated. The creature was as long as a ship. Its dark blue scales glistened in the sunset. Its head was like a crocodile's. Its body was as thick as a barrel. The serpent coiled around the base of the fortress and froze. It was guarding it. Bowden stared at the serpent and weighed his options. A direct assault was impossible. 40 creatures plus the snake. He had 1 earth skill and a body that was only 1/5 free. Tara could help, but she was weakened after 1,000 years of captivity. He needed a different strategy. Bowden looked at the ruins, at the water, at the cliffs, and he began to see a plan. The fortress stood on the cliffs. Cliffs are stone. Stone is his territory. He cannot defeat the serpent in the water, but he can change the battlefield. What if he removes the water? Bogdan looked at Tara. He asked if she could lift a boulder, a large boulder, one big enough to block the flow of water into the lower levels of the fortress. Tara thought about it. She said that together it was possible. Bogdan nodded. The plan began to take shape. Step 1. Reconnaissance. Find where the water enters the fortress. Step 2. Block the water's access. Drain the lower levels. Step 3. Without water, the serpents would weaken. The water creatures would lose their advantage. Step 4. Make his way to the priestess while the serpents were on land. Bowden stood up. He began circling the fortress along the cliffs, carefully, far from the creatures. He spent 2 days on reconnaissance. He found 3 places where the sea flowed into the fortress, 3 breaches in the rock foundation. Through them, water filled the lower levels. If all 3 were sealed, the fortress would dry out in a few hours. Bowden and Tara began working at night, when the creatures were less active. They lifted stones from the cliffs, slowly, quietly. They formed plugs, stone plugs for the gaps. They sealed the first gap overnight. Bowden could barely stand by morning. The skill was draining him, but the gap was sealed. A stone wall 2 meters thick. Water stopped flowing through it. They sealed the second breach the following night. Tara took on the bulk of the work. She was weak but precise. Her stones fit tighter than Bowden's. No cracks, no gaps. The third breach was the largest, 3 meters wide. The bulk of the water was pouring through it. Bowden and Tara worked together. He lifted the stones. She shaped and compacted them. They finished before dawn. The 3 breaches were sealed. The water stopped flowing in. Bowden and Tara retreated to the hill and waited. The water level in the fortress began to drop, slowly. The sea still crashed against the stone plugs, but the stone held. By noon, the lower levels were exposed. Wet black stone, seaweed, and dozens of water creatures thrashing against the rocks like fish on the shore. Without water, they were slow, clumsy. Their webbed paws slipped on the wet stone. Bowden watched them. The battlefield had changed. The serpent had suffered as well. It writhed on the exposed floor of the fortress. Its massive body thrashed against rocks. It tried to reach the sea, but stone barriers blocked the exit. The serpent was trapped without water. Bowden waited another hour. The serpent was weakening. Its movements grew slower. The aquatic creature on land was losing strength with every passing minute. Bowden stood up. He looked at Tara. She nodded. They made their way toward the fortress. The water creatures tried to attack. Bowden pulled stone spikes from the rock, precise strikes. Every spike hit its mark. The creatures were weak without water. The spikes pierced them with ease. Tara hurled rocks at them from the walls. Together, they crossed the outer courtyard in 10 minutes. Few creatures remained. The rest had slithered into crevices and cracks. The serpent lay in the central hall. Huge. Even weakened, it was dangerous. Its jaws could bite a man in half. Its tail could break through a wall. Bowden stopped. The snake looked at him. Yellow eyes with vertical pupils. Hatred. The snake lunged forward. Bowden was ready. He drove a stone spike into the floor in front of the snake. The snake slammed into the spike and recoiled. Bowden placed a second spike, a third. He wasn't trying to kill the snake. He was building a cage. Stone pillars rose from the floor one after another. The snake darted between them. With each new pillar, the space narrowed. Tara added her own, thicker, stronger. In 5 minutes, the snake was trapped in a stone cage. Its body writhed, but the stone held. Bowden walked past the cage. Behind the main hall was a descent, a staircase leading down, wet steps. Bowden went down. Tara followed him. Downstairs was a chamber, just like the one in the Black Mound, round, with runes on the walls, and a pillar of light in the center. A woman stood in the pillar. Small, fragile, silver hair down to her waist, skin pale, almost transparent, eyes closed, a frozen, not pain, not peace, sadness, deep, bottomless sadness. Bogdan approached the pillar. The mark on his wrist burned. The second link pulsed. He reached out and touched the light. Pain. Again. But he already knew what it meant. Not harm. A price. The pillar cracked. The light scattered. The woman swayed forward. Bogdan caught her. She was as light as a child. Her eyes opened, blue, bright as the morning sky. She looked at Bogdan, then at Tara behind him. She said nothing, just looked, like someone who has forgotten how to believe that anyone will come and cannot understand what is happening. Tara stepped forward. She said her name, Nerida. She said they were free, that he had saved them. Nerida watched. She didn't react. Bogdan set her down on the floor, gently. He sat down beside her and waited. He didn't speak, didn't explain, didn't rush her. He just sat there, like a hostage rescuer who's given the hostage time to realize the nightmare is over. A minute, 5, 10. Nerida blinked, looked at her hands, wiggled her fingers. Then she looked up at Bowden. And she cried. Quietly, silently. Tears rolled down her pale skin. 1,000 years of loneliness poured out of her in tears. Bowden sat beside her and said nothing. A link on her wrist flashed. A second link snapped. Her body felt lighter. Her muscles tensed. Her back straightened even more. 2 out of 5. Link removed. 2 out of 5. Skill acquired. Flow of healing. Bowden felt a new power. Something connected to water. Not destruction. Restoration. He looked at his palms, then at the weeping Nerida. 2 hostages were free. 3 targets remained. And he was beginning to feel that this body was finally becoming his own. Nerida hadn't spoken for 3 days. She followed Bowden and Tara in silence. She looked at the world around her with wide-open eyes. She touched the grass. She stopped at every stream and dipped her fingers into the water. The water reacted to her. It swirled around her fingers. It rose up to her palm. Bogdan watched and did not interfere. 1,000 years in a pillar of light. 1,000 years without touch. No sounds. No sky. A person needs time to remember that they are alive. On the fourth day, Narada spoke, quietly, in a voice that hadn't been used in a long time. She said she could feel the water, all the water around her, in the earth, in the rivers, in the clouds, in Bogdan and Tara's bodies. She said the water in this world was sick, poisoned. Without her, the springs were drying up, and what remained had become dirty. Bogdan asked if she could heal the water. Narada paused. Then she said she could. Not all of it, not right away, but she could. She knelt by the stream by the road and placed both hands in the water. The water darkened for a second. Then it grew lighter, clearer. Bogdan scooped up some water with his palm and took a sip. Clean, fresh, the first clean water he had drunk in this world. They were heading east. The map in Bogdan's mind showed the third marker, the priestess of fire, Ignis. Far to the east, beyond the ashfall, the most dangerous road of all. The desert was teeming with creatures, sandworms, fire lizards, and the desert itself killed with its heat and lack of water. But first, they had to cross the Central Plains. The lands between the coast and the desert. Cities stood here. People lived here. And here, Bogdan encountered another problem for the first time. People. The first city on the way was called Verin, larger than Korten. The walls were higher. The guards were more serious. Bogdan was stopped at the gates. A guard asked who they were. Bogdan said they were travelers. The guard looked at him, at his large frame, at his dirty clothes, at the two women behind him. He asked if they had any money. Bogdan said no. The guard said they didn't let vagabonds into the city. Bogdan could have shown off his skills. He could have lifted a stone from the ground and made an impression. But he didn't. An operator doesn't demonstrate his abilities without a need to. He walked around the city and found an entrance through the market gates. Merchants entered freely. Bogdan offered to help a caravan approaching the city. He lifted an overturned cart. The caravan leader was surprised by the large vagrant's strength and let them join the convoy. In the city, Bogdan looked for information. For 3 days, he worked at the market for food. He loaded, he hauled, he listened. In Verin, they knew about the Ashfall Desert. Trade routes bypassed it from the south. Caravans took the detour, adding a month to the journey. No one had gone straight through the desert for 50 years. The last group that tried to cross it consisted of 20 warriors. 2 returned, without equipment, without their minds. One muttered about a fire that lives in the sand. The second died a week later from burns that weren't visible on his skin. Internal burns. Bogdan remembered. Fire in the sand. Internal burns. The fire priestess's dungeon is protected by the element itself. Without protection from the heat, they won't make it. Bogdan looked at Narada. He asked if she could create a water shield, something to protect them from the heat. Narada thought for a moment. She said she could envelop them in a water film, a thin layer of water on their skin that would cool their bodies. But she needed water, a lot of water. There was no water in the desert. Bogdan began to calculate. The distance across the desert was about 100 kilometers. For him, with 2 missing links, that was a 3-day journey, maybe 4. For 4 days in the desert, they'd need water for drinking and for Narada's shield. 50 liters at least. Carrying 50 liters of water across the desert. You can't drag a cart through the sand, so he'd have to carry it himself. Bogdan could do it. The 2 removed links gave him the strength of a normal, strong man. 50 kilograms of water plus his gear. Heavy. But doable. He spent 2 days preparing. He bought leather water bags with the coins he'd earned. 8 of them. He filled them with water. He bought fabric for sun protection. Rope. food that wouldn't spoil in the heat, dried meat and hard flatbreads. Tara helped. She found an herbalist in Varen and traded burn ointment for help with his stone fence. Tara simply straightened the fence with a single touch. The herbalist stared at her with his mouth agape. On the 5th day in Varen, they set out, eastward, toward the desert. Nerida walked beside Bodin. She had grown stronger over those days. Her voice had become firmer, her movements more confident. But the sadness hadn't gone away. Bodin could see it. 1,000 years of solitude had left a scar. Not on her body, deeper. In the evenings, Nerida sat by the campfire and stared at the flames, without blinking. Bodin sat down beside her. He didn't speak. He was simply there. On the 3rd evening, Nerida spoke. She said that in captivity she had lost track of time after the first 100 years. Then she stopped waiting. Then she stopped hoping. Then she stopped feeling. She became water, still, dead. When Bodin shattered the pillar of light, she didn't realize she was free. She couldn't believe it. She had forgotten how to believe. Bodin listened. He didn't interrupt. Then he said one sentence, that believing isn't necessary. It's enough to move forward. Faith would catch up. Nerida looked at him. For the first time in days, something other than sadness flashed in her eyes. Curiosity. She asked who he had been before this body, before this world. Bodin paused. Then he said he had been a soldier, that his job was to pull people out of bad places, that he had died doing his job, and that now he was doing his job again, only on a different scale. Nerida nodded. She said he was a strange savior, not like the heroes who had come for her before. They came with swords and shouts, promised glory and feats, and died. But he came in silence, drained the fortress, locked up the snake. He sat down beside her and waited until she stopped crying. Bodin shrugged. He said that hostages aren't saved by shouting. They're saved by silence and a plan. After a week's journey, the plains ended. The earth became dry and red. The grass disappeared. The air grew hot. The Ashfall Desert didn't begin abruptly. It crept up on them. At first, it was just hot, then very hot, then unbearable. Bodin distributed the water skins. He carried 4 himself, 2 for Tara, 2 for Nerida. They wrapped themselves in cloth to shield themselves from the sun. Bodin walked first. He checked the ground. The sand was strange, reddish, and hot. Not from the sun, from within, as if something were burning beneath the sand. Bodin could feel the heat through the soles of his boots. By evening on the first day, he realized the scale of the problem. The heat intensified with every kilometer. By morning on the second day, the sand was burning even through thick leather. Nerida activated her water shield. A thin film of water enveloped each of them. Coolness, divine coolness. Bodin breathed freely. But the water was running out. The shield was evaporating in the heat. Nerida replenished it from the water bags. The consumption was greater than Bodin had anticipated. By the evening of the second day, they had used 4 of the 8 water bags. Half the water halfway through the journey, just enough. At night, the heat subsided but did not disappear. The sand continued to smolder. Bodin didn't sleep. He was watching. Something was moving in the desert, under the sand, vibrations, rhythmic. Something large was swimming through the sand like a fish in water. Sandworms. Bodin motioned to Tara, quietly, with a gesture. She felt the vibration. She raised her hand and compacted the sand around their campsite. A stone in the sand, a solid circle 5 meters in diameter. The worm passed by. It didn't notice them on the stone island, or chose not to attack. On the morning of the 3rd day, they moved on. Bodin walked and thought about the dungeon. Somewhere in the center of this desert, the priestess of fire, Ignis. The dungeon's guardian was surely a fiery creature. In a desert full of fire, its element. Bodin couldn't bring the ceiling crashing down like he did with the golem. He couldn't dry up the environment like he did with the snake. You can't remove fire from a desert of fire. A different tactic was needed. By evening on the third day, they saw the dungeon. Bodin had expected a fortress, or a burial mound, or ruins. Instead, a mountain stood before them. Not a sandy hill, a real mountain. A black rock in the middle of the red desert. Smoke was rising from the summit. A volcano, small but active. Liquid fire flowed from cracks in the rocks. Lava. Red-orange streams slowly crept down the slopes. Creatures roamed around the mountain. Fire lizards, the size of a horse, their scales red and scorching hot. Streams of flame burst from their mouths, dozens of them, Bodin counted, 30 in sight. Who knows how many more inside? And somewhere out there was a guardian, a fiery guardian of the volcano. Bodin sat and watched. They were running out of water, 2 water skins. Nerida's shield was weakening. Terra was getting tired. There was no time for a long siege. For the first time in the entire mission, Bodin felt that a plan was needed quickly. Not in days, in hours. He looked at the mountain, at the lava, at the lizards, at the cracks in the rocks, and at the water in the skins. Water and fire. What happens when water meets lava? Steam, a burst of steam, and stone. Lava doused with water solidifies into stone. Bodin looked at Nerida. He asked if she could control water from a distance, to pour all the water from the water skins directly into the lava flow at the base of the mountain. Nerida looked at the water skins. She looked at the lava. And for the first time ever, she smiled. Subtly, barely noticeably. She said she could. Bogdan nodded. The plan was insane, but there were no others. Bogdan broke the plan down into 3 phases. First, Nerida takes all the remaining water and hurls it at the main stream of lava at the mountain's entrance. The lava would solidify. The steam would blind the lizards and create a screen. Second, Terra and Bogdan would use the solidified lava as stone. They would raise walls, block the lizards from the outside, create a corridor to the entrance. Third, Bogdan would go inside, quickly. While the lizards are disoriented and the steam hasn't cleared, he finds the priestess, he frees her, he exits. Terra asked, what about the guard? Bogdan said he'd see the guard when he went in, and decide on the spot. Terra looked at him. She said that wasn't a plan. It was improvisation. Bogdan replied that the best operations are half plan and half improvisation. The main thing is to know which half is which. They waited until dawn. Bogdan wanted to attack at first light. The lizards were less active at dawn. They huddled against the lava to keep warm and moved sluggishly. At night, on the other hand, they were agitated. The fiery creatures loved the darkness because their flames were stronger in the dark. At dawn, Nerida stepped forward. She opened all the water skins. Water shot into the air. 6 buckets of water, not much. But in the hands of the water priestess, even a single drop became a weapon. Nerida stretched out her arms and the water flew, not as a stream, as a spear. A thin, compressed jet struck the main flow of lava at the base of the mountain. An explosion. Steam burst in all directions, a roar like a cannon shot. The lava froze. A black crust of rock 3 meters wide blocked the flow. The lizards screeched. The steam blinded them. They thrashed about, crashing into one another. Bogdan and Terra struck simultaneously. The hand of earth. The solidified lava obeyed. It was stone, hot and rough, but stone. Bogdan raised a wall of solidified lava on the left, Terra on the right, a corridor, 2 meters wide, from their position to the entrance of the mountain. The lizards tried to break through the walls. Bogdan built them up, higher, thicker. Terra compacted them. Sweat poured from both of them. Terra turned pale. 1,000 years of captivity had not passed without a trace. She was pushing herself to the limit. Bogdan ran. For the first time on this mission, he ran. The 2 removed links allowed him to run. Not fast, not like the operator he'd been in a past life, but running. Down a corridor of solidified lava, toward a black opening in the rock. toward the entrance to the volcano. He ran inside. The heat hit him like a wall. Inside the mountain, it was like an oven. The walls were red from smoldering stone. The floor was hot. The air burned his lungs. Neruda's water shield evaporated instantly. Bodin felt his skin start to burn, but he ran. The tunnel led downward, into the depths of the mountain. He ran and counted the seconds. Every second in this heat sapped his strength. He had maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. The tunnel led him into a hall, a huge one. The ceiling was lost in smoke and a red glow. The walls were covered in streams of slowly flowing lava, and in the center stood a guardian. Not a golem, not a serpent, a man, or what had once been a man, a figure in black metal armor. Fire burned in the cracks of the armor. Flames burst from the visor of the helmet where the eyes should have been. In his hands, a two-handed sword, red hot. The Fire Knight, the guardian of the third dungeon. Bodin stopped. The knight turned his head. The fiery eyes found Bodin, and the knight stepped forward. Bodin retreated. The knight's sword sliced through the air where he had been standing a second ago. The heat from the blade scorched his face. Bodin rolled aside. His body obeyed. Not perfectly, but enough to dodge. The knight attacked again, a vertical strike from top to bottom. Bodin stepped aside. The sword slammed into the floor. The stone melted from the impact. This sword would cut through any stone wall Bodin erected. The hand of earth was useless for defense, so it must be used for attack. Bodin struck the floor with his palm. A stone spike burst from beneath the knight's feet. He struck at the leg. The armor held. The knight staggered, but remained standing. Bodin raised another spike, then another. The knight shattered them with his sword. Each spike shattered under the blow of the red-hot blade. Bodin was losing. The knight was faster, stronger, and the heat was sapping his strength with every passing second. 3 minutes. He had maybe 3 minutes left before he lost consciousness from the heat. Bodin stopped attacking. He began to think. The knight in armor. Fire burning through the cracks. The armor holds its shape. Without the armor, the fire will dissipate. He needs to remove the armor. Or break it. Stone spikes can't be pierced. But stone isn't just spikes. Stone is pressure. Bodin fell to his knees. He placed both palms on the floor, and instead of spikes, he created a vice. 2 stone blocks on either side of the knight, simultaneously, maximum force. The blocks moved toward each other. The knight was caught between them. The stone pressed from both sides. The knight braced his sword against one block. The sword melted the stone, but the stone pressed on. Terra. Bodin didn't know if she could hear him, but he felt the stone harden. Terra was outside. She couldn't see what was happening, but she sensed his skill and amplified it. The stone vice tightened. The knight's armor cracked. Crack. The breastplate burst. Fire gushed from the crack, not like a flame, like a scream. The knight screamed. The sound was inhuman, metallic, ancient. He had been burning for 1,000 years. He had been burning and guarding, and now his armor was breaking. Bodin tightened the vice even more. The armor split apart. The fire inside shot up toward the ceiling. For a second, the hall turned white with flame. Bodin covered his face with his hands. The heat burned them. Pain, real, deep. The skin on his palms and forearms blistered. Then the fire went out. The knight vanished. The empty armor lay on the floor, shattered, dark, dead. Bodin was on his knees. His hands burned with pain, burns, serious ones, but he was alive. He stood up. Behind the guardian was a door, just like in the previous dungeons, the castle's symbol. Bodin didn't bother looking for a key. He placed his scorched palms on the door and pressed with the hand of earth. The stone of the door cracked, without a key, by force. 2 skills, and a furious unwillingness to linger in this hell for even a second longer. The door crumbled. Behind it was a cell, a pillar of light, orange, hot, a woman inside, tall, muscular, red hair like flames, dark skin. Even in captivity, an expression of fury was frozen on her face. Ignis, priestess of fire. Bowden approached. His hands were burned. His face was scorched. His clothes were smoldering. He reached out with his scorched hand and touched the pillar. Pain exploded, threefold, from the seal, from the burns, and from the pillar's fire. Bowden clenched his teeth so hard he nearly broke them. The pillar cracked, the light scattered. Ignis opened her eyes, golden, bright as the sun. She looked at Bowden, at his scorched hands, at his smoldering clothes, at his face covered in blisters, and she said that he was either the bravest man she had ever seen or the most foolish. Bowden replied that one did not preclude the other. Ignis stepped out of the pillar. Unlike Terra and Nerida, she did not stagger. She did not fall. She stood firm. 1,000 years in the pillar of fire had hardened her, not weakened her. She was a warrior before her imprisonment, and she remained one. Ignis looked at his burns. She raised her hand. The fire on the hall's walls flickered. The heat receded. It didn't disappear, but it receded. Ignis drew the heat from the air around Bowden. It became bearable. Bowden sighed. A link snapped. The third. 3 out of 5. A skill. Kara's flame. And the body. The body had changed, dramatically. The first 2 links made him agile. The third made him strong. His muscles tensed. The fat, which was not fat but shackles, shed another layer. Bowden clenched his burned hand into a fist. The fist was hard, powerful, a fighter's fist. He looked at his hands. The burns stung. But beneath the burns were the hands of a warrior. 3 hostages were free. 2 remained. And for the first time in his life, he felt dangerous. The 4 of them were leaving the desert. Bowden in front, Ignis beside him, Terra and Nerida slightly behind. Ignis was warding off the desert heat. A bubble of coolness moved around them. The fire lizards did not approach. They sensed Ignis and retreated. The priestess of fire was the mistress of this desert, not a guest. Walking became easier, but Bowden was in bad shape. The burns on his hands and face wouldn't heal. His skin was blistered. Every movement of his fingers sent a jolt of pain through him. Nerida walked beside him and tried to heal him. The flow of healing, a skill Bowden had received from her, but he didn't know how to use it yet. Nerida guided him. She placed her palms on his and created a stream of water between them. Thin, cool. The water washed over the burns. The pain receded. Slowly. It didn't disappear. It receded. Nerida said that the healing skill required practice, that water heals not with force, but with patience, like a river wears away a stone. Bowden nodded. He had plenty of patience. Ignis walked in silence for the first 2 days. She observed. She was assessing. Bowden could feel her gaze on his back. She didn't trust him. Not completely. She had seen how he saved her. She had seen the burns he had sustained for her sake. But 1,000 years of solitude teach distrust. Terra and Nerida tried to talk to her. Terra gently, Nerida quietly. Ignis replied with short phrases. Yes, no, I don't know. On the 3rd day, Ignis approached Bowden, directly, without preamble. She said she wanted to know why he was doing this. Why was he risking his life? Why was he getting burned? Why was he pulling them out? Bowden replied that it was his job. Ignis grimaced. She said that the heroes who came to her also talked about duty and work, and then they ran away when they saw the night. Bowden looked at her. He asked how many heroes had made it to the night. Ignis fell silent. Then she said none. They all died from the lizards while still outside. Bodin nodded. He said that was the difference. Those heroes tried to fight their way through by force. He changed the rules. He stripped the battle of what he feared and filled it with what he possessed. Ignis looked at him for a long time. Then she said he spoke like a commander, but looked like a vagabond. Bodin replied that appearance was the last thing worth looking at. Ignis snorted, but the corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. On the 5th day after the desert, they reached the foothills. The 4th beacon was burning in the north. The priestess of the wind, Saphira, high in the mountains, the Stormspine mountain range, the highest mountains in Aldoria. The air at the peaks is thin. The winds are so strong they knock you off your feet. And up there is a dungeon. Bodin looked at the mountains, white peaks shrouded in clouds. A week's journey to the range. The climb would take a few more days. It's cold at that altitude. There's little oxygen, wind, and monsters. Mountain monsters. Others. He began to prepare. 3 priestesses at his back. 3 skills. Earth, water, fire. For the first time, he had a team. Not just companions, a combat unit. Terra controlled stone. Nerida healed and controlled water. Ignis wielded fire. Bodan coordinated, just as an operator should. They passed through the mountain town of Ridgehaven, small, stone houses clinging to the cliffs. The residents eyed the 4 of them with suspicion, a large man and 3 women, one of whom was literally radiating heat. Bodan didn't linger. He bought warm clothes, ropes, climbing hooks. They had money now. Ignis melted several stones, and Terra compressed them into gold nuggets. Not perfect, but the merchants in the mountain town weren't picky. Gold is gold. The ascent began on the 3rd day after Ridgehaven. The trail led upward, steep, narrow. In some places, there was no trail at all, and Bogdan carved steps into the rock with the hand of earth. The 3 removed links gave him the strength of a veteran. He climbed confidently, not quickly, but confidently. Ignis warmed the air around the group. Without her, they would have frozen on the first night at altitude. Nerida kept an eye on everyone's condition. A stream of healing helped with altitude sickness. It thinned the blood. It relieved headaches. Terra reinforced the trail. She made every stone beneath their feet secure. Teamwork. Bogdan was leading a squad in this world for the first time. And he felt what he had once felt in a past life. When every member of the group does their part, and together they are more than the sum of their parts. On the 5th day of the ascent, they reached the clouds. Literally, the clouds were all around them. Damp, cold, zero visibility. Bogdan relied on his instincts, and on the map in his head. The priestess's mark pulsed closer. On the 6th day, the wind picked up. Not the usual mountain wind. Something else. The wind blew from all directions at once, changing direction every second, pushing, pulling. It tried to push them off the cliff. Bowden hammered pitons into the rock and tied the group together with a rope. They moved as a single unit, step by step. The wind howled, roared, lashed out in icy gusts. Ignis tried to create a fire shield. The wind blew it out. The flame wouldn't hold. Terra tried to raise a stone wall. The wind bypassed it. It lashed from above, from the sides, from below. This wind was alive, intelligent. It didn't want to let them through. Bowden understood. The Wind Priestess's dungeon was protected by the wind itself, not by creatures, not by a guardian, by the wind, which wouldn't let them climb any higher. They were stuck. 6 hours on the rocky ledge. The wind didn't let up. Bowden thought, you can't defeat the wind with force. You can't get around it. You can't outsmart it. It's everywhere. But the wind has a weakness. The wind can't blow with the same force everywhere at once. If it's strong on the left, it's weaker on the right. If it's blowing from above, it's weaker from below. Bogdan began to observe. to count the intervals between gusts, to note the directions. After 2 hours, he found a rhythm. The wind changed direction every 30 seconds, in a circle. Left, front, right, back, top. 30 seconds each. 2 seconds of calm between shifts. Bogdan explained to the team, "We move into the windows of calm. 2 seconds to make a run. Then we anchor. We wait for the next window." Tara nodded. Nerida nodded. Ignis said it was madness. Bogdan replied that madness had a better track record than caution. Ignis smirked. They began the ascent. Sprint, 2 steps, anchor. Bogdan drove a stone hook into the rock in a second. A lunge, 2 steps, an anchor. The wind lashed, roared, tried to tear them down. But they moved in its blind spots, between the gusts, between the storm's breaths, hour by hour, meter by meter. By evening, they had climbed above the wind belt, and the wind died down, suddenly, completely. Silence. Bogdan stood at the top and breathed. For the first time all day, no wind in his face. Before them was a platform, flat, perfectly level, as if cut with a knife. And in the center of the platform stood a tower, slender, tall, white stone, no windows, no doors at the bottom. The entrance was at the top, at the very top of the tower, the door facing the sky. Bogdan looked up, 30 meters of smooth stone, no ledges, no cracks. Climbing the wall was impossible. To carve steps into the white stone with the palm of the earth. Bogdan tried. The stone wouldn't yield. The white stone of the tower didn't respond to the skill. Protection. Magical. Bogdan tried again. Nothing. Tara tried. Nothing. The tower stone was beyond their control. Bogdan stood and looked at the tower. 30 meters of an insurmountable wall. The only entrance was from above. The stone wouldn't yield to the earth skill. No guards, no creatures, just a wall that couldn't be crossed. The simplest and most impossible obstacle. Bogdan sat down. He looked at the tower. He looked at his hands, and he began to think. Bogdan sat in front of the tower and thought. 30 meters. The stone won't yield. You can't climb up. So you can't climb up. You have to get to the entrance another way. He looked at the platform. Smooth stone. Nothing around the tower. The platform dropped off on all sides into chasms. The tower stood on this platform like a finger pointing to the sky. Bogdan looked down. Below the platform was a rock. An ordinary rock. Not white stone. Gray mountain rock. His rock. Obedient to the palm of the earth. The idea didn't come right away. He looked at the tower, at the platform, at the rock beneath it, and he understood. There was no need to climb the tower. He needed to lift the earth up to the tower. Bogdan stood up. He placed his hands on the platform. He felt the boundary between the white stone and the gray rock with practiced ease. The white stone was thin, a layer half a meter thick. Beneath it, ordinary rock, dozens of meters thick. Bogdan began to lift, not the platform, the rock next to the tower. He was creating a pillar, a stone pillar of gray rock, slowly, meter by meter. It was the hardest work he had ever done with his skill, to raise a stone pillar 30 meters high. Tara stood beside him, without a word. She placed her hands on the ground and began to help. Together, they worked faster. The pillar grew. 5 meters, 10, 15. Bogdan groaned from the effort. Sweat poured into his eyes. Tara turned pale. 20 meters, 25. Nerida placed her hands on both of their shoulders. A stream of healing. It lifted the fatigue, restored their strength. Not for long, but enough. 30 meters. The gray stone pillar stood next to the tower. Its top was at the level of the entrance. Bogdan carved steps into the pillar. He began to climb. His legs trembled with fatigue, but he kept climbing, step by step. The 3 removed links gave him the strength to climb. He reached the top of the pillar. Before him was the tower's door, white stone, carvings along the edges. No lock, no symbol, just a door. Bodan pushed it. The door opened. Inside was the wind, not howling, not lashing, quiet, steady. A stream of air flowed from bottom to top. Bodan stepped inside. Inside, the tower was empty, a single hall from floor to ceiling, and this hall was filled with wind. Whirlwinds swirled inside, dozens of small tornadoes. They moved chaotically, colliding, drifting apart, and in every vortex there was something. A figure, translucent, white, human, spirits of the wind, guardians. Not just one guardian, dozens. Bodan froze in the doorway. The spirits noticed him. The nearest vortex moved toward him. Bodan stepped back. The vortex struck the wall nearby. The stone cracked. A small vortex, yet a tremendous force. Dozens of them, in a confined space. Bodan couldn't fight here. Stone spikes are useless against the wind. Fire would be blown out. Water would be scattered. Earth, water, fire. 3 skills. All 3 are useless against the wind in a confined space. Bodan stood in the doorway and thought. 3 seconds. 5. 10. The whirlwinds were approaching. Think faster. The wind is strong in a confined space. The wind is strong when it has room to gather speed. But what if you remove the space? What if you fill the tower with stone, leave only a narrow passage to the priestess? The whirlwinds will have nowhere to spin. Wind in a crack is a draft, not a tornado. Bodan slammed his palms against the floor. Gray stone from beneath the foundation rose up through the floor. It filled the tower. Not all of it. The walls, the corners, the space between the whirlwinds. The stone grew like dough, filling the volume. The whirlwinds tossed about. It was getting cramped for them. They collided. They got in each other's way. They lost speed. Terra, from below, sensed what he was doing and added more stone. From the foundation, from the rock. The stone crept up through the floor of the tower and filled the space. Bodan was sculpting a corridor out of stone, narrow, a meter wide, from the door to the center of the tower. He filled the rest of the space with stone. The whirlwinds contracted. They tried to break through the door. Bodan set up a stone barrier, a narrow slit for him, too narrow for the whirlwinds. The spirits of the wind battered the stone. The stone cracked, but held. Terra supported it from below, compacting it, fortifying it. Nerida sent streams of water through the stone. The water filled the cracks. It froze inside them. The ice expanded. It cemented everything together. Ignis heated the stone from within. Hot stone is harder, denser. 4 skills, 3 priestesses and a bearer. They worked as a single mechanism. Bodan crawled through his corridor. Narrow, cramped. The stone pressed in from the sides. From above. Whirlwinds raged beyond the walls. A muffled howl. But they couldn't reach him. They lacked the space. Bodan crawled, meter by meter. He couldn't see where he was going. He felt it. The mark on his wrist burned. The 4th link pulsed. The priestess was close. The corridor led him to the center of the tower, a tiny space, 2 by 2 meters. Everything else was filled with stone. And here stood a pillar of light, white, bright. And within the pillar, a woman, short, thin, short, silvery white hair, a sharp face, defiant. Even in confinement, even with her eyes closed, she looked as if she were laughing at whoever had imprisoned her. Zephyra, the priestess of the wind. Bodan reached out, touched the pillar. The light cracked, scattered. Zephyra opened her eyes, gray, quick, alive. She looked at Bodan, at the stone corridor around her, at the howl of the wind spirits beyond the walls. And the first thing she did was laugh, loudly, infectiously. She said that for 1,000 years, knights and mages and heroes in shining armor had come to her, but the one who freed her was a dirty, sweaty man who had plastered her tower with stones. Bodin replied that he works with what he has. Zephyra laughed. Then she raised her hand. The wind inside the tower died down. Instantly. The whirlwinds stopped. The spirits of the wind froze and dissipated, like fog in the sun. Zephyra was free, and the wind obeyed her. Not the guards, her. Bodin felt a link, the fourth. It snapped with a sensation as if an iron rod had been pulled from his chest. His body surged upward, not physically, internally, as if gravity had weakened. 4 out of 5. Skill. Storm step. Bodin stood up, straightened, and realized he was standing differently, lighter, faster. His body finally looked like a fighter's. Not perfect. The last link was still holding. But the 4 that had been removed turned the vagabond into a warrior. Muscles, reflexes, speed, everything that had been locked away by the curse was bursting out. Bodin clenched his fist, quickly, like a punch. The air whistled. Zephyra looked at him. She whistled. She said he looked better. Bodin replied that this was only the beginning. They went downstairs. Terra, Nerida, Ignis, everyone was waiting below. They saw Zephyra and saw Bodin. Terra smiled. Nerida nodded. Ignis looked at his new physique and said that at least now she wasn't ashamed to stand next to him. Bodin wasn't offended. He could see that behind her barbs, Ignis was hiding the same thing they all were. Relief. Hope. The 4 priestesses are free. The 4 elements have returned to the world, and the bearer of the seal stands before them in a body that finally obeys him. 1 remains, the 5th, Lumen, the priestess of light, the last mark on the map. The center of the continent, deep underground, the most heavily guarded dungeon, and the most dangerous. Bodin looked at the 4 priestesses, his team. Then he looked at the map in his mind. The last marker was pulsing, the 5th link, the last one, the one that holds the truth. Bodin didn't know what truth, but he felt it would change everything. He told the team they were heading to the center, to the final dungeon, to retrieve the 5th and finish what they had started. Zephyra asked when they were leaving. Bodin replied, now. The descent from the mountains took 2 days. It would have taken a week before, but now Zephyra was with them. The priestess of the wind carried them. Not literally. She created currents of air that supported every step. Rocks that had previously required a careful descent now flew past their feet. The wind softened their falls. It sped up their movements. It caught them if anyone stumbled. Zephyra didn't stay silent. Unlike the other 3 priestesses, she talked constantly. She commented on everything. The mountains, the sky, the clouds, the faces of their companions. She said she had been silent for 1,000 years and now intended to make up for it. Ignis told her to shut up. Zephyra replied that a fire without wind goes out. Ignis flared up, literally. A flame licked her shoulders. Zephyra blew on it, and the flame went out. Ignis stared at her. Zephyra winked. Terra stepped between them and said that they had all spent 1,000 years in solitude, and that it wasn't the time to quarrel when their freedom had only just begun. Ignis snorted. Zephyra shrugged, but both fell silent. Bodin watched and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. A team, a complicated one. Personalities like the 4 elements, but a team. They had reached the Central Plains. From here, it was a 6-day journey to the center of the continent. The last marker burned steadily and brightly, deep underground. Bodin could feel it with his whole body. The 5th link on his wrist pulled him forward. On the 2nd day of their journey across the plains, they encountered the first people in a long time. A village, small, a dozen houses, fields all around, withered, the crops barely pushed through the gray earth. The villagers looked at them in fear. 5 strangers, 1 large man, 4 women, each radiating power. Tara approached the nearest field. She knelt down. She placed her hands on the ground. The earth trembled. Bodin felt it through his skill. Tara was pouring power into the soil. The dead gray earth darkened. It became moist, alive. The sprouts in the field stirred and stretched upward. Within a minute, they had grown to the size of a palm. The peasants watched with their mouths agape. An old man fell to his knees. He was muttering something. Bodin caught it. Priestess. The old man recognized her, maybe from legends. Maybe from something passed down from generation to generation for 1,000 years. The priestess of the earth had returned. The village fed them, the best food they had. Not much, but from the heart. The old man told Bodin that the world had gotten worse over the past year. There were more monsters. The land was poorer. Cities were closing their gates. Trade was dying. People say the end is near. That without the priestesses, the world won't last another generation. Bodin told the old man that the priestesses are returning. 4 are already free. 1 remains. The old man looked at him, asked who he was. Bodin said he was the bearer of the seal. The old man turned pale, said it was a prophecy, that the bearer would come and free the bed, that the world would be saved. Bodin said they could discuss the prophecy after he finished his work. They walked on. On the 4th day, the plains changed. The grass disappeared. The earth turned black. Not gray like before. Black. Dead. The trees stood bare. Not sick. Dead. Dried up skeletons. The air grew heavy, thick, dark, as if twilight itself had at noon. Bodin could feel it. A curse. Concentrated. Here, in the center of the continent, the usurper's curse was strongest. The source. The beginning. The 5th link was pulling, painfully, like a hook in his chest. On the 5th day, they found the entrance. Not a fortress, not a burial mound, not a volcano, not a tower. A pit. A huge pit in the ground. 100 meters in diameter. The edges were smooth, as if someone had cut out a chunk of earth and removed it. At the bottom, darkness. Complete. Absolute. No creatures around. No guards. No patrols. Empty. Silent. And that was what frightened them most. Ignis said she didn't like this place, that the heat in her blood was cooling. Zephyra said the wind didn't want to blow here. Nerida said the water in the ground around the pit was dead. Completely dead. Not a drop of life. Tara said the earth here was screaming, quietly, on a frequency only the priestesses can hear. Bogdan stood at the edge of the pit and looked down. The final dungeon, the deepest, the darkest, and with no visible defenses, which meant the defense was inside, and it was scarier than anything that had come before. Bogdan turned to the team. 4 priestesses looked at him. Tara calmly, Nerida quietly, Ignis fiercely, Zephyra with a smirk. He said they were going together, all 5 of them. No splitting up, no cunning plans. Down together. Together to the priestess. Together back. Ignis asked, what if there was a trap? Bogdan replied that a trap works once. They would work twice. Zephyra laughed. Tara nodded. Nerida raised her hand and created a sphere of water above her head, glowing, a soft blue light, instead of a torch. They began their descent. Bogdan carved steps into the walls of the pit, quickly, confidently. The 4 links gave him the strength and speed with which the stone yielded like butter. The steps spiraled downward. They descended, meter by meter. 10 meters, 20, 50, 100. The darkness thickened. Nerida's light barely pierced it, as if the darkness were not the absence of light, but the presence of something, something that absorbed light. At a depth of 150 meters, the walls of the pit parted. They emerged into a cave, a huge one, larger than any of the previous ones. The ceiling was lost in the darkness above. The walls receded into the darkness on either side. And in the center of the cave stood a throne, a stone throne, tall, with carvings that had once been beautiful but had now darkened and cracked. A figure sat on the throne, a person, a man, in dark clothes, motionless. Bodin stopped. The four priestesses stopped behind him. Tara exhaled, quietly, but Bodin heard it. Not just an exhalation, recognition. Tara recognized the figure on the throne. Bodin looked at her. He asked with his eyes. Tara answered with a single word. Usurper. The figure on the throne did not move. Bodin took a step forward. Another. He moved closer. The man on the throne was dead. No, not dead. He was like the priestesses in their pillars, sealed, frozen, eyes open but not seeing, chest motionless, life suspended. The usurper had sealed himself away. Bodin stood before the throne and looked at the usurper's face. Young, not evil, tired. The face of a man who had done something terrible and knew it. And behind the throne, behind it in the wall, the last pillar of light. White, pure, brighter than all the previous ones. And in the pillar, a woman. Lumen, priestess of light, the last one. But between Bodin and the pillar stood the throne, and the figure upon it. And Bodin sensed that the throne was not merely a piece of furniture. The throne was a lock. The throne was a seal. The fifth link. The last one. To free Lumen, he had to get past the usurper, and that meant learning the truth held by the final link. Bodin stood before the throne, the four priestesses behind him. The entire journey had led him here, to this moment, to this truth. He reached out and touched the throne. When Bodin's fingers touched the throne, the world around him vanished. It didn't fade, it didn't dissolve, it was replaced. Bodin stood in the middle of a green plain. The sky was blue, the grass was tall and lush, the air smelled of flowers and warm earth. Aldoria. But not the Aldoria he knew. Alive, vibrant, healthy. The world as it was 1,000 years ago. 6 people stood before him, 5 women and 1 man. Bodin recognized the women. Tara, Nerida, Ignis, Zephyra, Lumen. Young, strong, laughing, standing in a circle in the clearing. And the man. The same one on the throne, only alive. Young, with warm, dark eyes and a weary smile. He stood in the center of the circle and was saying something. Bodin couldn't hear the words. He saw a vision. 6 guardians of the world. 5 priestesses of the elements and the 6th, the guardian of balance. The one who ensured the 5 elements did not destroy one another. The vision shifted, the same 6, but their faces were different, tense, frightened. They stood atop a mountain. Below them, the world was burning, not with fire, with power. The 5 elements had spiraled out of control. The earth shook, the seas rose, fire poured from the sky, the wind tore through the mountains, the light was blinding. Something had gone wrong. Bodin saw the 5 forces merging into one, not harmoniously, chaotically, destructively. The combined power of the 5 elements was destroying the world instead of nourishing it. The keeper of balance stood in the center, trying to hold it together. His hands were trembling. His face turned pale with strain. He couldn't do it. The force was too great. He was shouting something to the priestesses. Bodin saw them trying to separate, to break the connection, to stop the elements from merging. It wasn't working. The force was clinging to them, pulling them toward each other, like a magnet. The 5 elements wanted to merge, and if they did, they would destroy everything. The entire continent, all living things. The keeper made a decision. Bodin could see it on his face. the moment when a person chooses between the bad and the terrible. The keeper stretched out his arms. Chains burst from his palms, black, heavy, not physical, magical. 5 chains struck the 5 priestesses. They wrapped around them, bound them, by force, violently. The priestesses screamed. They struggled. They didn't understand. The keeper was sealing them away, one by one, not out of hatred, out of desperation. He was locking away the 5 elements separately so they would never merge again, so the world wouldn't burn. 5 dungeons, 5 seals, 5 priestesses scattered across the light of the continent, as far apart from each other as possible. So their powers wouldn't resonate, wouldn't attract each other, wouldn't merge into a destructive whole. And then the keeper did the final thing. He created a 6th seal on himself. He bound his own power, the power of balance, the only power that could control the united elements. He hid this seal within a random body, in a body that would never find its way to the priestesses, in a body so weak and pitiful that the bearer would not survive the first dungeon, a safety net. If anyone were to free the priestesses, it would be only the one who bears the seal of balance, only the one who can keep the 5 elements from merging. If the bearer proves worthy, if he walks the path, if he proves capable of bearing this burden. The vision faded. Bodin stood once more in the dark cave, his hand on the throne, his eyes wet. He understood. The usurper was not a villain. He was the 6th guardian. He had sealed the priestesses to save the world from their combined power. And he had sealed himself so that no one could use the power of balance without a price, without a path, without proof. Bodin removed his hand from the throne. He turned to the priestesses. They stood motionless. They had seen it too. Through his touch, through the bond of the seal, Tara wept, quietly, soundlessly. She remembered everything that 1,000 years in the pillar had erased from her memory. She remembered how the guardian had bound her, how she had screamed, how she hadn't understood why. Now she understood. Nerida stood with her eyes closed. Tears streamed down her pale skin. Ignis did not cry. Her fists were clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. Blood dripped onto the floor. She said he could have explained, could have told her, could have asked. Instead, he chained them up without a word. Tara replied quietly. She said there was no time, that the elements were merging, that another second and the world would have perished. He did the only thing he could in that moment. Ignis wanted to object, but she remained silent, because she knew Tara was right. Zephyra stood silently, for the first time ever, silently. No jokes, no smirks. She looked at the figure on the throne, at the guardian's face, and in her gray eyes was something Bodin recognized. Forgiveness. Heavy, painful, but forgiveness. Bodin turned toward the throne. The usurper sat motionless, sealed within his own curse, for 1,000 years, just like the priestesses, only worse. The priestesses didn't know why they were imprisoned. He knew. He remembered every second, and lived with it. Bodin looked at the pillar of light behind the throne. Lumen, the priestess of light, the last one. Between him and her, the throne, the seal, the truth, and a choice. Because now Bodin knew the price. To free Lumen meant to remove the final link. To remove the final link meant to break the seal of balance. Breaking the seal of balance meant the 5 elements could merge again. And if they merged and no one held them back, the world would perish, just as it had nearly perished 1,000 years ago. Bodin stood before the throne and felt the weight of this choice. Free Lumen and risk the world, or keep her imprisoned and preserve the balance. Save the hostage or save the world. For an operator accustomed to rescuing people at any cost, this was the hardest question of all. Bodin closed his eyes. He thought. Not for a second, not for a minute, for a long time. The priestesses waited. They were silent. Finally, he opened his eyes. He looked at the four priestesses, at Terra, who had believed in him from day one, at Nerida, who was learning to live again, at Ignis, who was hiding behind her anger, at Zephyra, who laughed so she wouldn't cry. Then he looked at the pillar of light, at Lumen, at the last hostage who had waited 1,000 years. Bodin said he hadn't freed them just to leave the last one in a cage, that the keeper had imprisoned the priestesses because he hadn't found another way out. But Bodin found one. 1,000 years ago, they couldn't control the merging of the elements because they weren't ready. They weren't together. They didn't know how. Now everything is different. The four priestesses have walked the path. He has walked the path. They have become a team, and he bears the seal of balance, a power created precisely for this, to hold the 5 elements together, not to scatter them to the corners of the world, to hold them together. Bodin stepped toward the throne. Bodin placed his hand on the shoulder of the figure on the throne, the keeper of balance, the 6th, the one who sacrificed everything. The throne's stone cracked beneath Bodin's fingers, not from force, from the seal. The seal of balance within Bodin's body responded to the guardian's seal, 2 halves of a single power, the creator and the bearer. The throne split in 2. The guardian's figure trembled, dark eyes blinked. Life returned to them, slowly, like dawn. The guardian looked at Bodin for a long time, without words. Then he looked at the 4 priestesses behind him, at Terra, at Nerida, at Ignis, at Zephyra. His face contorted, not with pain, with guilt, 1,000-year-old guilt. He tried to speak. His voice wouldn't obey, a dry rasp instead of words. 1,000 years without a voice. Terra stepped forward. She stood before the keeper. She looked down at him. He sat on the ruins of the throne. She stood, free. He bowed his head, awaiting his sentence. Terra knelt before him. She took his hands in hers and said that she remembered, that she had seen the truth through Bodin's seal, that she knew why he had done it. The guardian raised his head. Tears welled in his eyes, the first in 1,000 years. Ignis stood behind everyone. Her face was stony. She had not forgiven him. Perhaps she never would, but she did not interfere. Zephyra stood beside Ignis. She was silent. She watched. Nerida approached the guardian. She placed her hand on his forehead. A stream of healing water flowed through his parched body. He shuddered. He coughed. Then he sighed. His first free breath in 1,000 years. Bodin didn't wait. Time was passing. Lumen was waiting. He walked around the wreckage of the throne and approached the pillar of light. White, pure, bright, brighter than the sun. Bodin squinted. The woman in the pillar was beautiful. Not like the other priestesses, each of whom was beautiful in her own way. Lumen was beautiful, like light. Impossible to describe. One could only see. Golden hair, skin like marble, perfect features, not humanly perfect. Eyes closed, peace on her face. Not the sadness of Nerida, not the fury of Ignis. Peace. As if she knew this moment would come. Bodin reached out, touched the pillar, and the world exploded. Not with pain, with light. Light flooded the cave, flooded his consciousness, flooded everything. White. Absolute. Bodin could not see, could not hear, could not feel anything but light. And in that light, a voice. A woman's. Quiet. Warm. The voice said that he had come, that she had been waiting, that she knew he would come because she had seen. For 1,000 years in a pillar of light, she had seen everything. Every hero who came and perished. Every year of the dying world. Every tear of every priestess in captivity. And she had seen him. a filthy vagabond in a ditch who got up and walked away. The voice said that the fifth link held on to one condition. The bearer must accept the seal of balance not as a curse, but as a gift. Not as a chain, but as a responsibility. He must agree to bear it, voluntarily, not because he must, because he wants to. Bodin stood in the white light and listened. To accept the seal of balance, forever. To become the one who holds the five elements, not for a time, forever. The keeper had broken under this burden over 1,000 years. He couldn't take it. The seal crushed him. And he sealed the priestesses because he could no longer bear the balance alone. Bogdan closed his eyes in the white light. He thought about his past life, about Aleksei, about the special forces operator who covered the group's retreat, who died not because he had to, but because he couldn't do otherwise, who didn't abandon people, who bore the responsibility not because he was ordered to, but because it was the right thing to do. Bogdan opened his eyes. He said yes. The light flashed and went out. The pillar crumbled. Lumen stepped forward. Her eyes were open, golden, like a molten sun. She looked at Bogdan and smiled, quietly, calmly, like a person who had seen the future and knew it would be good. The fifth link snapped. Bogdan felt it like a thunderclap. His whole body flared. Not with pain, with power. The last shackles shattered. Every muscle, every bone, every nerve. Freedom. Complete salute. The body that had been a prison became a weapon. No, not a weapon, a tool. Bodin stood up straight. He was different, not just stronger, different. Tall, broad-shouldered, muscular, but not bulky. Every movement precise, every gesture economical, the body of a warrior, the body of an operator, a body that finally matched the one who lived inside. 5 out of 5, all links removed. Skill, the radiance of the source. Bodin looked at his hands, clean. The burns had healed. The skin was smooth, strong. He clenched his fist. The air cracked with the speed. 5 skills, earth, water, fire, wind, light, and the seal of balance, the 6th power, the one that holds the other 5 in place. Bodin stood in the cave. 5 priestesses surrounded him. The guardian on the ruins of the throne. Mission accomplished. All hostages are free. All chains have been removed. But this is not the end. Bodin could feel it. The world above continued to die. 1,000 years without priestesses had ravaged it. The liberation of the priestesses would not bring the world back to life instantly. It takes time, it takes strength, and it takes doing what the Guardian couldn't do 1,000 years ago. Uniting the 5 elements. Not chaotically, consciously, under control, pouring them into the world, healing Aldoria. Bodin looked at Lumen. She nodded. She knew. She had always known. They climbed out of the cave, 6 of them, 5 priestesses and Bodin. The Guardian remained below. 1,000 years on the throne had drained him. He could not walk. Tara stayed with him briefly to help. She promised to catch up. Bodin climbed first. The steps he had carved on the way down now seemed wide and comfortable. 4 removed rungs then. 5 now. The difference was like walking waist-deep in water versus running on dry land. He soared up the steps, literally. The storm's step tossed him upward. The wind carried him. Bodin emerged from the pit and stopped. It was daytime at the top. A gray, dull day in a dying world. Black earth around the pit. Dead trees. Heavy air. But now Bodin could see more. The seal of balance had opened his eyes to a vision he had never had before. He could see streams of power, like rivers, invisible to the ordinary eye. 5 streams. Earth, water, fire, wind, light. Once they flowed across the entire continent, nourishing every stone, every drop, every leaf. Now they were thin, weak, barely noticeable. 1,000 years without a source. 1,000 years without priestesses. The streams had dried up. The world lived on the remnants, and the remnants were running out. The priestesses rose in their wake. Lumen stepped onto the surface and looked up at the sky, like Terra once did, like Nerida, like all of them. The sky, freedom. But her gaze was different, not one of wonder, but of sorrow. She saw the world as it had become, the world she remembered as green and alive, now gray and dead. Ignis stood beside her, silent. Her usual fury was gone. In its place was resolve. Zephyra wasn't joking. She stood and looked at the horizon, at the dead plains, at the gray sky. Nerida was crying, quietly, just like back then in the dungeon. Only now it wasn't from pain, it was from grief. The world she loved was dying. Bowden gave them a moment. Then he spoke. He said that 1,000 years ago, the Guardian couldn't handle it alone. He bore the seal of balance by himself, without support, without a team. He controlled the 5 elements with the strength of a single man, and he broke. Because this is not a job for one person. Bowden said he wasn't going to repeat that mistake, that they would do this together, the 6 of them, 5 priestesses, each with her own element, and him with the seal of balance. He doesn't control them, they control the elements. He merely maintains the balance between them. Each is responsible for her own power. He ensures the powers do not clash. A team, as always. Ignis asked how. Bowden said they needed a place, the central point of the continent, a place from which the currents diverge in all directions. Lumen said that place was right here, beneath them. The pit is not just the entrance to a dungeon. It is the heart of Aldoria, the point where the 5 currents once converged, where the priestesses once stood together and nourished the world. Bowden looked at the pit, at the edge, at the black earth around it. Here, he nodded. The 5 priestesses stood in a circle, just as they had 1,000 years ago. Terra in the south, Nerida in the west, Ignis in the east, Zephyra in the north, Lumen in the center. Bowden stood next to Lumen, at the very heart of the circle, the seal of balance, the connecting link. Terra raised her hands. The earth trembled. Not here. Everywhere. The entire continent felt it. The cliffs in the south shifted. The mountains rumbled. The plains quaked. The earth remembered its priestess. Nerida raised her hands. The water responded. The rivers in the west swelled. The seas rose. Underground springs gushed forth. The water sensed its mistress. Ignis raised her hands. Heat swept across the land from the east. Volcanoes awoke, not for destruction, for warmth. The earth was warmed from within. The frozen soil thawed. Ignis restored fire to the world. Zephyra raised her hands. The wind howled, not destructive, alive. It scattered the gray clouds. Fresh air poured onto the continent. The wind carried moisture from the seas to the fields, carried warmth from the volcanoes to the cities. It carried seeds from the forests to the wastelands. And Lumen. Lumen raised her hands. Light, bright, pure. True sunlight broke through the gray sky. For the first time in 1,000 years, the rays struck the earth, and the earth responded. The 5 elements flowed, simultaneously, through the heart of Aldoria, through the circle of priestesses, through Bowden. He felt it. 5 rivers of power coursed through his body. The seal of balance flared, not with pain, not with heat, with something he could not describe. The 5 forces drew toward one another. They wanted to merge, just as they had 1,000 years ago. Bowden stood between them, not physically, internally, through the seal. He felt how the earth drew toward the water, how the water drew toward the fire, how the fire drew toward the wind, how the wind drew toward the light, and how the light drew toward the earth. A circle, a closed one. The elements wanted to become one, and if they did, they would destroy everything. Bowden wouldn't let them. He didn't separate them. He didn't tear them apart. He guided them, like a director guides a cast, each to their place, each in its own direction, each doing its own work, together but not converging on a single point, together but in balance. The earth went down, into the depths, to strengthen the roots of the world. Water flowed across the surface, to fill rivers and lakes. Fire went into the core, to warm from within. Wind went upward, to move the clouds and carry life. Light went in all directions, like a pulse, like the heartbeat of the world. Bodin stood in the center and held. The five forces passed through him and diverged along their own paths, without merging, without colliding, in balance. The seal worked. Not as a curse, as a tool, like the helm of a ship. Bodin steered, and the world obeyed. It went on for a long time, minutes, maybe hours. Bodin lost track of time. He felt the entire continent, every stone, every drop, every spark, every gust of wind, every ray of light. Aldoria was coming to life, slowly but surely. The black earth around them lightened. It turned gray, then brown, then dark and damp, alive. The dead trees did not come to life, but between them, green shoots emerged from the ground, tiny, fragile. The first living plants on this land in 1,000 years. Bodin saw them and smiled. The ritual ended at sunset. Bodin lowered his hands. His body ached, every muscle, every joint. Not from wounds, from the power that had passed through him. The 5 elements, each more powerful than anything he had ever experienced. He had held firm. The seal of balance had held. He had endured. The priestesses were exhausted as well. Terra sat on the ground. Nerida lay down. Ignis knelt. Zephyra leaned against a dead tree. Lumen stood. The only one of them all, she stood and looked up at the sky. The sky was clear. For the first time in 1,000 years, blue, with white clouds. The sun was setting in the west, and the sky was ablaze with orange and pink. Beautiful, incredibly beautiful. Bodin sat down on the ground. He watched the sunset, and he felt something he hadn't felt since his first day in this world. Peace. 2 people rose from the pit. Terra led the guardian. He walked with difficulty. 1,000 years on the throne had ravaged his body. But he walked. Terra supported him, just as Bodin had once supported her. The guardian saw the sky and stopped. He looked up, then to the sides, at the sprouts in the ground, at the fresh air, at the living sky. His face changed. The 1,000-year-old guilt hadn't gone away, but something had been added to it. Hope. He looked at Bodin, tried to say something. His voice still wouldn't obey him. A rasp. Bodin walked up to him, stood beside him, said he understood, that he held no grudge, that the guardian had done what he could in that moment, and that now everything would be different. Because now there were 6 of them. 7 if you counted Bodin himself. The guardian looked at him, tears again, but different ones, not from guilt, from relief. He said one word, the first intelligible word in 1,000 years, a name. Kale. His name was Kale. Bodin nodded. He held out his hand. Kale shook it, weakly, but he shook it. They spent the night at the edge of the pit, all 7 of them. Bodin didn't sleep. He sat and felt the world. The seal of balance didn't turn off. It worked constantly, like a heart. 5 streams flowed across the continent, slowly restoring what had been lost. Bodin felt each of them. Earth, water, fire, wind, light. They weren't trying to merge. Not yet. Not while the priestesses were nearby, each controlling her own element. But Bodin felt the pull. Quiet, constant. The elements wanted to become one. They always would. And the seal of balance would stand between them. Always. That was his burden. Forever. Bodin thought about it. About how he had accepted not just power, a commitment, indefinite, No leave, no replacement. Just as Kale, the guardian, had borne it for 1,000 years. Alone and broke. Bodan is not alone. He has 4 priestesses, 5 if you count Lumen, and Kale, who knows how the seal works better than anyone. A team. Bodan smiled in the darkness. An operator without a team is a dead man. An operator with a team is a force. In the morning, they set out, westward, toward the nearest city. They had to show the world that the priestesses had returned, that the world was coming back to life, that there was hope. They walked across the plains. The land changed with every passing hour. The gray grass turned green. The streams filled up. The air grew fresher. Slowly, barely noticeably. But Bodan saw it. Streams of the elements flowed, and the world drank them in like a parched sponge. After 3 days of travel, the land around them was no longer dead. Not yet healthy, but alive. Sick, but alive, not dead. The difference was enormous. On the 4th day, they saw a city. Small, gray walls. The gates were closed, guards on the walls. Bodan approached the gates. The guards looked down at them from above. 7 of them. 1 large man. 5 women from whom emanated a power visible even to the naked eye. And 1 emaciated man being led by the arm by the eldest of the women. The captain of the guards shouted down from above, demanding they identify themselves. Bodan identified himself, bearer of the seal, and he named those behind him, the 5 priestesses of the elements, guardians of Aldoria, those whom the world had awaited for 1,000 years. The guard remained silent. Then he shouted that vagabonds and swindlers would be hanged. Bodan did not argue. He raised his hand, the hand of earth. The stone before the gate rose into a wall, 2 meters, 3, 5. Then Bodan removed the wall. In a single motion, the stones sank into the ground without a trace. The guard on the wall turned pale. The gates opened. They entered the city. People on the streets stopped and watched. Tara walked and touched the ground. Cracks in the roads closed up. The cobblestones smoothed out. Nerida approached the city well. She placed her hand on the rim. The water in the well rose, clear, fresh. People watched, silently. An old woman at the well scooped up some water. She tasted it, and she wept. Water, clean water, for the first time in years. The news spread through the city in minutes. The priestesses have returned. The priestesses have come. By evening, the whole town was in the square, hundreds of people. They looked at the 5 women, at Bodan. They didn't believe it. They couldn't believe it. They had waited 1,000 years, and now they were here. Bodan stood in the square and looked at the faces. Hope, timid, uncertain, but hope. The very same hope he had seen in the hostages' eyes when he opened the door of their cells and told them it was all over, that they were free. Bodan turned to the priestesses, his team, his squad. Tara, calm and dependable. Nerida, quiet and strong. Ignis, fierce and loyal. Zephyra, bold and free. Lumen, bright and wise. 5 priestesses, 5 elements, 5 women he had pulled out of their prisons, one by one. And Kale, the broken guardian who was beginning to stand tall again, who looked at the city and the people and, for the first time in 1,000 years, saw that his sacrifice had not been in vain. Bodan stood among them and knew there was still much work ahead. The world isn't healed in a day. The currents of the elements must be sustained. The seal of balance must be carried. Every day. No days off. Endlessly. But he wasn't alone, and that changed everything. A year had passed. Bodan stood on the hill and looked at Aldoria. The continent was changing, slowly, steadily, like a person recovering from a serious illness. The plains were turning green. The rivers were filling up. Forests were creeping back into the wastelands. Cities were opening their gates. Trade routes were coming back to life. The monsters hadn't disappeared, but there were fewer of them. Far fewer. Streams of the elements flowed across the continent, driving out the darkness that bred the creatures. With each passing month, the world grew stronger. With each passing month, there were fewer monsters. Bowden felt it through the seal of balance. Every sprout, every stream, every gust of warm wind. The world was breathing, not gasping, breathing. The priestesses scattered across the continent. Not forever. Each returned to where her element was needed most. Terra went south, to the Black Mound. There, the earth had suffered the most. The mound had become ruins. The stone hounds scattered. Terra healed the land around her. She raised the fertile layer. She restored life. For the first time in 200 years, the villages around the mound sowed seeds and reaped a harvest. A real harvest. Not a handful of stunted ears of grain, but fields full of crops. Terra became for the southern lands what she had been 1,000 years ago. A guardian, a mother, a foundation. Nerida went to the western coast, to the drowning fortress. The ruins stood empty. The water creatures scattered when the priestess left. Nerida did not return to the ruins. She stood by the coast and began to heal the water. The sea, the rivers, the underground springs. The fishermen who had been afraid to approach the fortress now went out to fish and returned with full nets. The water became clear. The fish returned. The coastal towns came back to life. Nerida had changed. The sadness hadn't gone away completely. Perhaps it never would, but a purpose had emerged above the sadness. She was healing the world and healing herself. Bowden visited her once a month. They sat on the rocks by the sea and were silent. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Nerida smiled. Quietly, rarely, but she smiled. Ignis went east, to the Ashfall Desert. The desert hadn't disappeared. It was part of the world. Fire is not evil. Fire is warmth and strength and light. Ignis did not destroy the desert. She tamed it. The fire lizards obeyed the priestess. She did not destroy them. She tamed them. The desert became passable. Caravans traveled straight through again. Trade routes came back to life. Cities in the east received goods they hadn't seen in years. Ignis became the mistress of the desert. Tough. Fair. Travelers, merchants, and warriors came to her. She let through those who respected the desert. Those who didn't, she turned away. Without explanation. Ignis never fully forgave KL, but she stopped hating him. She told Bowden during their last meeting that hatred is a fire that consumes itself. She prefers a fire that warms. Zephyra went into the mountains, to the Stormspine range. The tower stood empty. The spirits of the wind had scattered. Zephyra did not choose to live in the tower. She lived in the wind, literally. Bowden didn't always understand her. Zephyra appeared when she wanted to, disappeared when she wanted to. She descended from the mountains on gusts of wind and brought news from across the continent. She was the eyes and ears of the group. She flew, not like a bird, like the wind. Over the mountains, over the plains, over the seas, and she laughed. She was finally free, truly, without walls, without ceilings, without a pillar of light. Zephyra was the happiest of the five. She told Bowden that for 1,000 years she had dreamed of one thing, of the sky, and now it was hers. Lumen remained in the center, at the heart of Aldoria, near the pit that had become a sacred place. People came to her, for advice, for a blessing, for light. Lumen welcomed everyone, quietly, calmly, with a smile that warmed like a ray of sunshine. She was the wisest of the five, the most patient. She saw the future, not clearly, in fragments, but she saw. She told Bowden that the world would survive, that the flow of the elements would be fully restored within a generation, that Aldoria would be green and alive again, that the children being born now would grow up in a world that had no memory of darkness. Kale stayed with Lumen. He was recovering, slowly. His body was regaining strength. His voice returned. He helped Lumen. He explained to the pilgrims how the elements worked. He taught those who wanted to learn. He was no longer the keeper of balance. Bowden carried that burden. But Kale was a teacher, an advisor, a keeper of knowledge. 1,000 years of solitude had not passed without a trace. He was quiet, reserved, but when he spoke, people listened, because behind every word lay 1,000 years of reflection. Bodin lived in Korton, in the city where he had started, where he had been a heap in a ditch, where guards had chased him from the gates. Now people bowed to him in the streets. Children ran after him and shouted his name. The very same guard who had shoved him in the chest now saluted him at every encounter. Bodin did not seek revenge. He did not gloat. He did not remind them. He simply lived. He woke at dawn. He felt the currents of the elements through the seal. He checked the balance. The 5 rivers of power flowed evenly. Sometimes one grew stronger and needed to be gently restrained. Sometimes another grew weaker and needed a nudge. Delicate work. Daily. Endless. Bodin didn't complain. It was his job. The one he had chosen. The one he had accepted. Willingly. Once a month they gathered, all 7 of them, in the heart of Aldoria, by the pit that had turned into a temple. White stone, green grass, clear water in the fountain. Light poured down through the open dome. They sat in a circle, just like when they activated the elements. And they spoke. About the world, about work, about life. Terra spoke of the harvests in the south. Nerida of the purity of the water on the coast. Ignis spoke of caravans crossing the desert. Zephyra spoke of what she saw from above. Lumen spoke of pilgrims and visions. Kale spoke of what he had taught his students. Bodin listened. He coordinated. He guided. As always. Just like on the first day, the operator. He did not stand at the head. He stood in the center, between the 5 forces, between 5 women, between the past and the future. He maintained the balance. Once, after such a meeting, Zephyra asked him if he missed his old life. Aleksei, that world. Bogan thought, for a long time. Then he said he didn't miss it. That Aleksei had died covering the group's retreat. And that was a good ending for an operator. And Bogdan lives protecting the world. And that's a good continuation. Zephyra nodded. Then she said he was strange after all. Bowden replied that it was the nicest thing anyone had ever said to him. Zephyra laughed. Ignis snorted. Nerida smiled. Terra shook her head. Lumen looked at him with her golden eyes and said nothing. But that silence said it all. Bowden stood on a hill above Korton. Evening. Sunset. The sky was orange and pink and gold. The city below was alive. Children ran through the streets. Merchants were closing their stalls. Guards were taking over for the evening shift. Ordinary life. Alive. Real. The one for which everything existed. Bowden looked at the city, at the sunset, at the green plains all around, at the distant mountains to the north, at the world he had saved. Not alone, with his team. The 5 links of the curse had turned into 5 links of power. The 5 dungeons had become the 5 hearts of the world. 5 hostages had become 5 guardians. And the vagabond from the gutter had become the one who held it all together. Bowden raised his hand. He looked at his wrist. The mark was still there, 5 links. But now they didn't weigh him down. They glowed, warm, soft, like a pulse, like a heartbeat. The 5 elements flowed through him. Earth, water, fire, wind, light. In balance, in harmony. Bowden lowered his hand. He took a deep breath. The air was fresh and warm, smelling of grass and smoke from hearths and bread from the bakery. The scent of the living world. He turned and walked down, toward the city, toward the people, toward life. The one whom everyone had written off as a heap in a ditch stood at the head of the continent's salvation. No, not at the head, at the center. Just as one who maintains balance should stand. Bodin walked and smiled. For the first time in both his lives, he was in his rightful place.